Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this public meeting of the Royal Cornwall Hospital Trusts Board. And particularly like to welcome members of the public who have joined us, and also any staff who have joined us online as well. There's a couple of bits of housekeeping I need to go through before we start the meeting. First of all, can I remind you that the meeting is live streamed, and there will be a recording of the meeting placed on the Trust's YouTube channel. And could I also remind members of the public that Teams Live has the feature of live subtitles, and they can be accessed by clicking on the screen. In terms of the board etiquette, could we all mute our microphones if we're not speaking? And each speaker introducing a report should assume board members have read the report and highlight the key points only. So just a couple of minutes, please, for each introduction to help us get through the business. After the introductions, we'll have questions and comments and discussion. We do try, if we can, to avoid the use of acronyms. So even if they're very familiar acronyms to you, would you mind just spelling them out when you speak, because members of the public may not be as familiar as we are with them. We don't have any fire alarm drills planned, so if the fire alarm does sound, colleagues in the room should vacate the building and gather in the car park. In terms of members of the public and questions, could you raise any questions you have using the Q&A function on Microsoft Teams? And these will be reviewed by the company secretary as per the protocol set out in the paperwork. The questions will be asked at item 19, and a maximum of 15 minutes is allocated for that item. The company secretary will ask the question on your behalf, and then you'll seek a response from the relevant director present, or arrange for a written response to be included in the minutes. So the company secretary will manage that process. The meeting in public will conclude, although of course I'm relying on members of the board. The meeting in public is due to conclude at 1 o'clock, and we will have a break for about 15 minutes at around 5 to 11 until 10 past 11. And could I just also ask board members, the first time you speak, if you can remember, could you just say who you are and what your job title is, so that members of the public know who's speaking. Thank you very much. So apologies for absence. We've got Alison Thorne Henderson, Chief People Officer, will be a bit late arriving, I think. And we've got apologies from an Associate Non-Executive Director, Alan Jones. Any others?
No other apologies, Chair.
Thank you. We've got some colleagues who will be joining us for time business. Megan Nichols, the Patient Engagement Manager for item 5, and also possibly Denise Reed, the Breast Screening Programme Manager. And then at item 11, we have Sarah Kuta, who's the Guardian of Safe Working Hours. So could we go on then to item 2, Declaration of Interests? Are there any declarations of interest that board members would like to make? Anything on screen? Don't seem to be anything. The board's register of interest is included within the agenda pack and is publicly available on the Trust's website. So could we go on then to item 3, the minutes of the previous meeting, and that was held on the 7th of January. And could I invite the board to approve the minutes of the previous meeting as an accurate record? Happy to do that. Thank you. And then if we could go on to item 4, matters arising, and the action log. The action log is there in your papers. Are there any questions for the company secretary in relation to the action log or the updates?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So it's I'm Richard,
Non-Executive Director.
I'm Richard Kramer. Yes. It's the very last action log, and I note this is more an ICB action. It's just that the new guidelines for learning disability and autism have been promised since December 2023. I know we had a wider focus on neurodiversity, and I can see it went to the board in February 2025. I just want to know if the actual document has arrived yet, And of course, it's not just about the document, but it's also about its communication application. So I'd be keen to have an update of, are we going to see these guidelines?
Yep. Kim O'Keefe, I'm the dual Chief Nursing Officer for RCHT and CFT. I'm also the Deputy Chief Exec at RCHT. So the deep dive went to the meeting, the system meeting in February. I've asked Adrian Flynn, who's the Medical Director at CFT, to give me an update. So I will make sure, and then we can get the guiding principles, what was discussed, and any actions, because they will affect both providers as well as the wider system. So I'll follow that up now they've done the deep dive.
Great, that's really helpful. I know there's some great stuff out there, particularly reflecting the lived experience of people with neurodiversity. So I'm hoping with the length of time that's taken to produce it, we'll get something quite good. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Kim. Any other points? Anything from you, Lindsay? Okay, so we note the action log and the progress that's been made. If we could move then to item 5. Somebody want to come in?
Put your hand up.
Thank you. It's on this, Adam Broom, Non-Executive Director. It's on the same item actually in the action log that Richard raised as well, just whether we could have a copy of the deep dive that went to the Integrated Care Board. I'd like to see that, please. That's available.
Yes, that will be part of the information I get from Alistair, the chair, Adam. So I'll get the deep dive. It should come then with an action log and the minutes of the meeting where, you know, what was discussed.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so can I just check anything else on the action log? Thank you very much. Let's move on then to item 5, the board story, which is always a very important part of our agenda, which really grounds us, I think, in our core work. And could I ask Kim O'Keefe, the Deputy Chief Executive, Dual Chief Nursing Officer, to introduce this item, please, Kim?
Thank you, Chair. So welcome to Megan Nichols, who is our Patient Experience Manager. And today, as we all know, it's International Women's Day, but we've got a plethora of events that have taken place over this week to make sure that women's health, well-being, leadership is being discussed. And I must say now we would be doing the same for International Men's Day in October. So what better way to share a story today that came from one of our patients who had the experience of needing a breast screening appointment, and her story on how important it is to actually attend, be aware and make sure that you are indeed taking care of yourself in this very important sphere. Also, I'm hoping, I'm not sure, Megan, but we'll see as we run through the presentation that we may be joined by Denise Reeve, the breast screening program manager, but you'll hear from her on the video as well. So Pete, if we could start the video, thank you.
Due to our climate and our culture, our beautiful breasts are, for the majority of our lives, kept covered. So, going to have a mammogram is an anxious thing for quite a lot of us, but it really should not be. My appointment was to attend for a screening in a large NHS caravan parked in Wickes car park. Brilliant. No tricky or expensive parking, no queues, no wait, no time for me to change my mind. Although this is probably the 4th time I've had a mammogram now. You go up a few steps into the caravan. There's a small space where your nurse checks your details, date of birth, address, the usual things. Then she takes you through to the next room. There's just you and the nurse. She asks you to take off your top only. I always just wear a baggy t-shirt and no bra, it makes it easier. You're then asked by the nurse to stand in front of the machine, and your first breast is gently placed by you, and with the nurse's help too, on a sort of small glass shelf. This can be moved up and down to accommodate tall or shorter ladies. Another glass plate or shelf is lowered very slowly and gently. The nurse then, from behind a screen, like they do in X-ray departments, takes 2 or 3 images, You then raise your arm, and the nurse then very gently and carefully rearranges and takes another image. Then the same thing happens again. This time your second breast is positioned, always very gently, and image is taken. It all takes minutes, and after a very short time, the nurse invites you to pop your t-shirt back on, and that's it. The pressure is very slight, and it feels awkward raising your arm, but there is no pain. Minutes later, you're driving home. But why have a mammogram in the first place? Firstly, and to reiterate, this is a painless procedure or examination. I can think of lots and lots of things we ladies have done to enhance our external appearance. Some of the things, although not all, do involve pain, but your mammogram will take 15-20 minutes max. It's painless and it will take away the worry of breast cancer. If your result is clear and no sign of abnormalities, you can, like me, feel full of vitality, confidence, joy, and ready to enjoy life 100%. If there are any concerns, you will be contacted, but quite often, as the nurse explained to me, it may well be just different to the last mammogram, but absolutely nothing to worry about. They are there to talk if you need to. Don't worry alone. The great thing about having your mammogram regularly is the fact that treatment at an early stage is possible and is vital to your well-being. You are in excellent hands should this be the case. To conclude, we all deserve to feel and look good inside and out. Women are strong. We have to be. So many rely on us, but please have your mammogram for you. And do this as an example to other women who are not sure. Be sure, be strong, be savvy, and mostly be certain. Then everything you've ever wanted to do, you can do. Don't live life in fear. Have your quick and easy mammogram and then enjoy life to the full.
National Breast Screening are running a campaign from the 17th of February 2025 for 6 weeks with the aim to increase participation in breast screening. It will run nationally with an additional activity in London, targeting all women of eligible breast screening age. It will particularly focus on reaching first-time invitees and those living in higher levels of deprivation, alongside targeted activity for women from ethnic minority audiences, disabled audiences, and those with accessibility needs. The campaign call to action will encourage women to attend their appointment when invited.
So can I take the opportunity to thank Denise and the team? And I know it's the patient's words when she said nurse, but it's a radiographer. I'd just like to point that out, which is really, really important. I'd also like to point out the importance when we say close to home, the absolute incredible easiness and of access for the mobile vans and how positively it is experienced by our patients. And absolutely, as we go on, that inclusivity, reaching hard to reach those with vulnerabilities, and how we go further in to make sure that everyone has access to this service is really important. Megan, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, so it was really great to hear from this patient. It was from filling in one of our patient friends and family test feedback surveys. She got in contact with us and expressed how important she feels breast screening is, and wanted to tell her story. So I thought that was a great opportunity to put forward our patient's experience, and yeah, Denise's addition on the end there to outline the campaign, national campaign. Yeah, I thought it was a really good opportunity. Denise isn't able to attend today, so any feedback or questions, I'll do my best, but I can feedback to the team.
Thank you, Megan. And I think we're going to look at how we share this story, because patients hearing from patients is really powerful, because often there is a lot of myth busting as regards what this process is, and especially as regards whether it's painful or not, which can be attributed to people not taking up their appointments. So we will look how we use this further. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Kim. And thank you, Megan, to you and all your colleagues for everything you do. This is very important work. Are there any comments or questions? Adrian?
Yeah, thanks for that, Kim. Really, really interesting. There's been a few studies nationally about the use of AI in breast screening, and the results have been very encouraging. And I was wondering whether that's something that the Trust might look at in the future.
I will pick that up with Denise. Megan and I can take that back and feed it back, Adrian.
So that was Adrian Davis, Non-Executive Director. I've got Isabel Down, the Vice Chair. Kelvin, did you want to come?
So I'm Kelvin Hipperson, Chief Information Officer. So our diagnostic imaging colleagues already use some AI capabilities. I don't know specifically in breast screening, but they do have a knowledge of those kind of capabilities.
Thank you, Kelvin. So Isabel and then Mary Kane, Chief Medical Officer.
Kelvin picked up what I was going to say, so you're fine there.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, as David said, I'm Isabel Down. I'm a non-executive director. Really welcome this board story, particularly on International Women's Day today. So as a woman and as somebody that's gone through breast screening, I can heartily endorse everything that was shared through that story. And for me personally, it's just been a joy to be able to access that kind of diagnostic in a place that suits me. It's near to my home. It also coincides with parking in a supermarket car park, so I can actually do my shopping as well as get my breast screening done. So it's all very, very carefully choreographed to make my life as easy as possible. So I think the theme around International Women's Day is accelerating action. So I think hopefully this board story will accelerate the possibility for women to feel confident about going for their first breast screening and recognise that it's completely painless and actually is something that all of us should be doing. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Isabel. Richard, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, my question was about, it was great that the video talked about reaching different groups, particularly hard to reach groups. And it would be great just to hear a little bit more how we do that in Cornwall, focusing on disabled people and people from the Gypsy Roma traveller community.
Thank you, Richard. Was your hand up, Mary?
No, I was going to pick up the point that I was going to pick up the point that Kelvin raised about the fact that our radiology team are already really engaged with the AI agenda and are constantly thinking of new ways to innovate. So I have no doubt they'll be moving in that general direction. Right? Thanks.
Adam?
Thank you. Helpful to hear about whether we have sufficient mobile units to meet the need and whether we've got the right maintenance program for those mobile units to keep them functioning.
As far as I'm aware, yes, Adam, but I'll pick that up with Denise. I know that we deliberately kept the service going, well funded and well maintained. And I haven't heard any concerns, but I will double check that. I can also pick up what the uptake is compared to coming into one of the acute sites, so to speak, as well.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions on this board story?
Okay, it will be good to hear how we are meeting the needs of different communities. Just specific examples of our outreach work would be great.
So in terms of what we're taking from this conversation, I think that's one thing, just looking at the company secretary to note, the hard to reach communities. And I think that Isabel really has said it all in terms of the importance of this programme. And maybe this exposure at the board meeting can give it a little bit of a boost, particularly in Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. So can we note the story with thanks to everybody involved, to Megan, and particularly to the patient who very kindly shared her experience with us. Thank you very much. That takes us on then to item 6, which is my report. You've got a written report. Happy to answer any questions on that. There are just 2 other things I wanted to mention. One of the things that I've noted when I've gone around talking to people individually is that nobody said to me, I wish we could have longer papers at the board meetings. So I think you'll see today that compared with at least the last couple of board meetings that I've seen, we've just about halved the volume of paperwork. And I think it's very high quality paperwork as well, because options are clear, argumentation is clear, and recommendations are clear. So could I just thank the Chief Executive and the corporate governance team and all the people who write our papers for taking note of our concerns about the volume of the paperwork. And it's important because it gives us more time and space then to discuss and concentrate on what we really need to talk about and think about in relation to our paperwork. So I hope you feel that that's been an improvement, and it's something clearly we'll have an ambition to continue. The other thing just to mention to you is it doesn't start until the 14th of March, but on the 14th of March we enter the so-called PERDA period before the local elections in May. Further guidance will be going around to the board and our community more generally, but it is important, of course, that we don't make decisions which could have effect on the public in terms of the implications for elections, that we don't have politicians on site, and that we all, which I know you are anyway, but that we're all quite circumspect in what we say on social media, particularly in a run-up to elections. So if we could note that, and the communications team, I think Lindsay will be sending out more information. Apart from that, I would like us to approve changes to committee membership, which is set out on the agenda paper. And the suggestion is that Uzma Bozai, a non-executive director, becomes a member of the Finance and Performance Committee, the People and Culture Committee, the Remuneration and Appointments Committee, and the Charitable Funds Committee. So sorry about that, Uzma, but if the board is happy, we are going to keep you busy. Board content? Thank you. Are there any questions or comments for me on the chair's report, please? Robin.
That I've had the pleasure of taking around a number of locations across our trust so far, David. We've got more planned in, and to feed back how much colleagues have welcomed the time they've spent with you and enjoyed the time to share their successes with you, and they've really felt that they've not been rushed when they've been speaking with you and sharing their views. So just want to say thank you.
Thank you, Robin. I appreciate that. It's actually the best part of the job, walking around and talking to colleagues. Clearly, I don't want to get in the way because everyone's very busy, but if people are happy to see me, I'm very happy to walk around and talk to colleagues. So if there's nothing else on my report, can we move on to item 7? Just checking if there's anything on the screen. So let's go on then to item 7. And can I ask Steve Williamson, our Chief Executive, to introduce his report, please?
Yeah, thank you, David Mittendal. Dith Lowen Sans Pern, happy St. Pern's Day for yesterday. And just a couple of things I wanted to draw out of the report. 3 areas, really. The first one is to draw board members' attention to a number of really quite significant and very positive announcements or developments. You see in the report that we confirmed government's approval of our new hospital programme, Women's and Children's Hospital. As we all know, that was subject, as all of the new hospital programme sites were nationally, to a review following the new government's establishment. And we were absolutely delighted to see that our Women and Children's Hospital was approved for progression in Wave 1. What that means is we can expect construction on the main hospital build to start in about 3.5 years' time, in 2027, 2028. And that paves the way for the enabling works that we previously discussed to be proceeding at pace. And as we know, that's going to be the single biggest capital investment ever in hospital and healthcare in Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. So we're absolutely thrilled to see that confirmation, and we're now working very, very closely with the new hospital programme team to enable that to progress. Two other equally positive announcements, although not necessarily the same absolute scale of investment, but the National Energy Efficiency Fund awarding 1.4 million for further work across our sites to reduce our carbon footprint, and the award of £3.5 million funding from the National Institute for Health and Care Research to establish a commercial research delivery centre. All three of those, David, I think reflect a huge amount of work from colleagues involved in each of those three areas. And it really is positive to see either the NHS England's national confidence in us or the Department of Health and Social Care's confidence in us that is signalled by those investments. And of course, all three of them will have a direct impact on improving care or improving the way in which we deliver care to residents and patients across Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. So I just wanted to celebrate those three things firstly.
Could we just pause there in case there are any comments on that? The only thing I would like to say, as well as to endorsing your thanks to all the colleagues who've worked so hard, is this seems to me, particularly on International Women's Day, to be a real declaration of faith in your Royal Cornwall hospitals and in Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. So it is a very important moment. Clearly now we have to deliver it on time and on budget. There'll be a huge amount of work to do that. But I think, we couldn't be more pleased really to receive this major investment. And I think you've probably seen elsewhere in the country which haven't received these investments. They're facing a very difficult prospect in terms of capital investment. So it's difficult really to overemphasize how important this is for us, not only for women and children, but also for the wider delivery of healthcare across Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. So because it is so important, I just wanted to pause in case there are any questions or comments to Steve on it. I'm going to introduce Adrian Davis, who's going to be the non-executive director who checks and challenges this process. Adrian.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to update. I met with Roberta yesterday, had quite a lengthy meeting with her, and we've agreed some further meetings. Roberta's going to provide me with the outcome of the two workshops that were recently held and the timeline and where we are in relation to the planning. And then I've got a tour of the new hospital site booked for the middle of April. And it is my intention to attend the programme board meetings going forward to keep that check and challenge and overview of the project as it moves forward. Significant piece of work for Cornwall. Really well done.
It's fantastic. And it seems kind of fitting. There's a huge amount of colleagues who've been involved in enabling this success. But on this International Women's Day, we might say thank you to two colleagues. Roberta, as Adrian's just mentioned, for the role that she's played in being programme director. And of course to our Deputy Chief Executive, who's also our joint SRO for this programme, Kim, for her leadership in enabling this to progress. And thank you to everybody else, of course, who've been involved as part of that collective team.
Thank you, Steve. So could we record our thanks for all the magnificent progress so far, Lindsay, bearing in mind that, there's a lot of work still to do. And Adrian, if I'm free, I'd quite like to come on that visit to the site with you.
Yes, yeah. I'll forward the details.
Sorry, Steve.
No, that's really important to recognise the scale and the impact of that. So the second thing I wanted to update on was some urgent emergency care performance matters. You'll see in item 40 in the IPR that our urgent emergency care performance in January continued to be challenging, and we particularly experienced a critical incident during the first week in January, in the period 3rd to the 8th of January. So we continue to see very significant challenges. We did see a rapid recovery from the critical incident, which is very positive. My report then flags some of the further progress that's been made during the month of February. So we'll see that reflected back in our next integrated performance report. But you'll see that I've highlighted a number of areas where we've made some significant progress. They include the implementation of a timely ambulance handover protocol approach to help to accelerate patient flow through our organisation. We've also implemented the first stage of our new medical model. Both of those things have taken place during the month of February, and we've been working closely with an international expert, Dr. Ian Sturgis, on further opportunities to improve flow through our clinical vision of flow. So 3 really significant areas of development which have progressed over the course of the last month. We are seeing some initial signs of some significant improvement. And we'll have to see that embedded before where we can be certain, David, of that making an ongoing difference. But even in the month of February, if we compare the last half of February with the first half of February, the timely ambulance handover protocol and the implementation of the medical model have supported about a 30% improvement in our ambulance handover performance time, which is a really positive initial indication. It is an initial indication, and we'd all want further assurance going forward, but reflects a huge amount of work from colleagues in our organisation. We've also seen that the ambulance category 2 response time for the whole month of February come down to broadly the average across the whole of the South Western ambulance service region. That's a really important step for us. For many months, we've been significantly higher than that average position. And of course, we want to drive that further. We've also seen some initial improvements in our aggregated patient delay. That's a key indicator for our emergency department crowding risk, such that's indicating that risk level may start to be reducing. So we need to test and check that all 3 of those improvement areas continue, but really positive to see that improving position during the month of February. And then the final thing I was going to update on was 2025-26 planning. As we all know, it is a very challenging financial outlook for the NHS. We, as all systems were required to do and all providers were required to do, submitted our initial plan on the 27th of February. And like many parts of the NHS, that initial plan submission continued to be a deficit at that point. The final submission is required towards the end of March. Again, that's a national timeline, and I'm sure that will require some further difficult decisions for us to take as a board and for our system partners to take as everybody works really hard to seek to ensure that the NHS nationally, regionally and locally operates within its allocated financial position. As we know, we do have a good track record of this. The last 3 to 4 years, we've achieved as an organisation a balanced position, and that's been the case at a system level. And we can see evidence that our productivity, as one of the measures from the NHS England, is improving. And in fact, the latest report issued shows that our overall productivity is now better than the NHS England national average. So that's been a direction of travel that we've been on for a period of time, but we haven't achieved that prior to the latest report. So positive to see that. But I know that teams across our trust are working really hard and considering very challenging financial environments and considering difficult decisions across our organisation as we all work towards trying to achieve that balanced budget position. Because of the timing of the public boards, at our next public board, it will be after the start of the new financial year, of course, and we'll be reporting back to the board in public the progress we make around the 25-26 planning position. So they were the areas I was going to update on. David, very happy to take any questions or comments from colleagues.
Thank you very much indeed, Steve. We've got 3, I think, at the moment. The first one is Richard Kramer, then Matt Hill, and then Robin Jones. So, Richard, can we go to you first, please?
Yes, mine's just a comment because I was lucky enough to go around with Ella to emergency and urgent care last week, I think it was. So I could see the new medical model and clinical vision for flow, and I was very impressed. I'd like to mention the receptionist staff because we tend to overlook them, and they had a real value-based, can-do, resilience attitude. It was really good to see. We spoke to one of the deputy heads of nursing, and she was very supportive of the changes. She said they had really motivated staff and how the use of the improvement of the physical environment had a real impact on the well-being of staff. And I saw that it was busy, but the corridor areas were completely clear, which is real first-hand experience of the benefits of the new model. And lastly, I just wanted to mention that I was told how important changing the general medical rota was, particularly the acute physician cover in the evening, and how crucial that will be. And I think that's probably the next phase, or the phase that's coming on now. But overall, I was very impressed, and I'm very glad to have the visit.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Matt Hill.
Something asked by Richard, it sounds wonderfully positive, the improvement in patient flow, the new ways of working. And it's just to get a sense of how staff are feeling, the new ways of working, and just to, understand their sense of the positivity, the improvements in patient flow as well.
Thank you, Matt. There was a bit of reverberation on the sound there, but I think I got the gist of it. Steve?
Yeah, I think I caught most of that, Matt. I think part of that was how are our staff feeling given the changes that have been implemented. That's really important that we take every opportunity to understand that, to hear that, and to learn from that. So we use a number of mechanisms to achieve that. That includes using our huddle in our emergency department each morning to understand any key actions. We have been doing in the first part of our timely ambulance handover protocol, a daily debrief the following day to look back at the previous day to identify any opportunities for improvement. That's also given mechanisms to understand how our colleagues across the organisation are experiencing the changes that we've made. And from an operational perspective, from a medical and a nursing perspective, there are a number of mechanisms that we already have in place to give the opportunity for colleagues to share their feedback about the experiences. And although some of the improvements I've shared are about improvements in the emergency department setting or in the ambulance setting, the timely ambulance handover protocol approach has an impact across the whole organisation. Really what that's about is ensuring that we remove every possible delay and enable patients to move from ambulance into the emergency department, from the emergency department into our acute medical unit, and from our acute medical unit into our base wards. So all parts of our organisation have been affected by and are engaged in the timely ambulance handover protocol. I might just check if Robin, Mary or Kim would want to add anything to Matt's question about feedback and reflections from staff colleagues.
Steve, the reason my hand was up actually was to acknowledge, so Kim, Mary, Steve, myself have been privileged to be invited to those wash-up sessions. And the reason I say invited is because it's the team that have been leading the sessions. It's not us leading it, it's them. So we are so grateful they invited us in to hear some of that feedback. It was wonderful to see the energy in the room, people saying, actually, we can go further faster, we can do more than the plan. So in the first week of our plan, we weren't going to run the timely handover protocol for the weekend, but the team wanted to, so they therefore did. And that was lovely to see. And yes, we've absolutely seen improvements in our performance, and we've overtly shared photographs of across the trust of the ED corridor being empty. But there is a flip to that, and it's important that we acknowledge that for some colleagues, this has felt harder for them. So for some team members, they've said this is feeling tougher to do, and I think it will at this phase. And I think that's reasonable. But we need to overtly say that here as well. And as this ties together with the new medical model, the timely handover protocol, and that working team that's taking that forwards, and the clinical vision of flow that we also referenced in the IPR, that meeting happened on the 12th of February, start to tie together how we're changing the way our organisation flows. So those colleagues that are at the moment thinking this still feels really tough, as those other actions start to land for us, those colleagues, for me, the acid test is those colleagues will then start to see actually coming into work every morning, it isn't as pressured. On my ward, I don't have patients displaced. In the ED, I don't have patients displaced. I can come in and I can do my work that I intend to do. So I think, colleagues, we have definitely seen an improvement, but we need to acknowledge that for some of our team members, they're not quite feeling that at the moment.
Robin, thank you for all you've been doing on this. Kim.
It's all right, thanks.
Kim and then Mary.
Yeah, thank you. I think, as Robin has said, the wards have felt the pressure. Traditionally, it's been felt in ED. We're very, very clear that our focus remains on proactive discharge. So once a patient is deemed safe to go, we do everything we can to do that proactive discharge. But the surge within the wards has been far speedier and quicker, and has resulted in, of course, we are still in every temporary escalation space, but we have, as a multidisciplinary team, and that includes estates, fire, as well as our IPAC, infection prevention and control colleagues, identified in areas a place where someone can sit if they're say waiting for one last thing before they go and they haven't gone to the discharge lounge, to make sure that the focus is on getting the right patient to the right ward as opposed to doing multiple moves. So we are working really closely, and as Robin says, us attending and being invited to attend, not lead, listen, be there to answer, unblock if that's what's required at those wash-ups is really important. This is a whole team engagement event, and they are owning the actions and challenging themselves. And in fact, Mary and I have been working with our medical colleagues and our pharmacy colleagues at looking how do we get our discharge summaries and our home medication done speedier. What is the blocks? What can we do to help? So we should be able to come more rapidly, hopefully, out of our escalation and surge space.
Okay, Mary.
Yeah, thank you. So I concur with everything everybody else has said, and it's certainly the case that every single cog in the process is absolutely vital. So it's not about any one single group of staff, and it's very much about the staff owning it. I was just going to give some feedback about the first week of the new medical rota. So we're into week 2 now. It went live last Monday. It was something that had been hugely long in the making, and something of a triumph to have got it over the line. Ultimately went in the time that it did, with special mention to Dr. Laura Wesson, who I think, and I would be grateful if the board could thank her, because the amount of work that she particularly put in was extraordinary, and the good grace with which she did it was really heartening. The first week it went really well. I have met with both the acute emergency medics on the rota, and particularly with the acute physicians who staff the medical admissions unit, to get their feedback on the first week. We've got some areas that we can perhaps focus on to tweak over time, but you might have seen me reaching for my phone just now, and I was scrolling back to see some of the feedback I was getting over the weekend. I wanted to give you the words, and 2 people used the words elated. It went really well. And we saw real benefits in terms of timeliness of senior decision making and the time at which it took for a consultant to see all the patients, even in the first week, and particularly over the Saturday and Sunday. So it's early days because we are only in week 2, but really positive start.
Thank you, Mary. And as you say, it's invidious to pick out particular staff groups, but I'm sure a lot of medical colleagues have had to make quite a bit of change to their lifestyles, if you like, and may have had some inconvenience in making this change. So I think it's greatly to their credit, and that we have senior clinical decision makers available at the times of greatest demand seems to me to be a very big step forward. So I do understand it's early days, but I think the board should record its thanks to all the teams who've done so well, but particularly to recognise that the introduction of the medical model is a big new medical model is a big step forward, and very grateful to all the clinical staff who've changed their working patterns as a result. And I'm very glad to hear they're getting professional satisfaction from so doing. And if you think it's appropriate, Mary, I'd be very happy to write on behalf of the board to Laura Wesson.
I'd be grateful.
To thank you, to thank her for all she's done.
Yeah.
Are there any other comments or questions on the Chief Exec's report, Isabel?
Thank you. It was a really follow-up actually to Mary. I'm switched on. No idea. Is that better?
Gone. Yeah.
Okay. It's corrected itself. Apologies. Yes, it was a question really for Mary, just to say in terms of the potential impact on less senior medical staff, how that's being managed and what support's there, because I guess there's changes in everybody's working patterns through the introduction of the new model. And so, you know, what's the impact for less senior staff?
Their rotas haven't been changed in large part, but we are keeping an eye on it and reviewing it regularly. So we're having weekly touch points with a plan to have a more formal wash-up of the new medical rota in about a month. I mentioned that there are some things that we might need to tweak, and the early reflections after the first week have been that because there are more senior decision makers later on in the day able to make decisions to, in particular, discharge, there are administration processes that go along with the discharge process. So Kim's already mentioned the medications that need to be prescribed to go out and the discharge summaries, and we don't know that we've quite got the balance of the junior staff to support the senior staff right yet, so that is something we're keeping a close eye on.
Thank you, David. It was just a follow-up point for Robin on what you were saying about the feedback from some staff that are still feeling challenged with all of the changes to the medical model and the discharge. What are the comms systems in place to keep an eye on that? So just to keep that conversation going, to hopefully then see the changes and hear more positive feedback from them. But I'd just be interested to hear what's in place.
So we've got an open dialogue happening, which is why we've got the positive messages, but also the where people are feeling feeling the pressure, feeling the impact, and we would keep that dialogue open. I specifically raised that some colleagues aren't feeling the benefit yet, because one of the things that those colleagues said is we've been very positive in our comms, and why wouldn't we be? But they've asked us to make sure we're being balanced in our comms. So that's all part of having that healthy dialogue that you describe. I would also say that it's right that some of our colleagues are pointing out that we're still under pressure. We have still got long waits in our emergency department for patients to get into a bed. We still have patients with long waits to leave our hospital. And whilst all improving, those waits are still there. So our colleagues will be rightly standing and looking around their areas saying, that has got better, and it has, saying, but it's not where I want it to be. And I applaud our colleagues for saying that, because that's exactly the attitude we want in our organisation, to celebrate we've moved from here to here, but to say, but we need to be there, and it won't feel right until we're there. So I think, Uzma, the fact that that is happening should be our assurance in the board that we're hearing it, we're saying it out loud in these forums, as well as Mary's described, meeting colleagues, having that open dialogue, having face-to-face conversations. PHP feedback sessions, they're face-to-face, no Teams links. So we're in the room, we're doing this together. And that is something that we need to do more of. Be in the room, face-to-face, not across a screen, because that's how we can also see people's body language. When everybody's in the room going, yeah, it's brilliant, you can see the 2 or 3 people that are holding back a little bit. And that you can then maybe have a conversation offline with those colleagues to say, are you a bit more challenged in where we're finding ourselves? So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds great that we're keeping that dialogue open. I'd also welcome hearing how it's being shared across the organisation, outside those rooms and outside, the teams that are directly impacted by it. So as an organisation, obviously we hear the updates here at board, but how we can also share that, the good and the bad, across the organisation, and then also that trajectory. So over the course of the next few months or a year, as an organisation, we can see that progress would be great.
Okay. Just before I bring in other colleagues, there's some indications in the chat that there's some problems with the sound or the bandwidth in relation to some people who are online, but I understand that the public feed is working well, so I hope members of the public can continue to see and hear us. But there's a suggestion that we might turn our cameras off in the room to improve the bandwidth, because there's another camera that picks us up for the public feed. So if you do have your camera on, could I suggest you just turn it off and see if that improves things? And maybe colleagues, board members who are online could just keep indicating to us if they can hear us okay or if they've got a problem. I think that's all we can do really, isn't it, Charlie, at the moment? Thank you. So I've got Kim who wants to come in, and then Steve.
It's really important doing this open dialogue, so being out and about helps us, if there are problem areas, to go out up onto the units to help and support, not fix, because actually we're there to support the teams being able to help themselves. It's really important. So once the morning meeting, everyone goes out and they know, everyone's clear of what the actions are and who's going to do them and go out. So I've been keeping a really close eye with Jo and not seeing anything come up through freedom to speak up, for example, and that's generally a good litmus test for what's going on in the organisation. So whilst there's challenging conversations still to have, it's how we create that safe zone for teams to be able to have that and try and deal with the issue at source to be able to then move on. And yes, we've had some really good days. We've had some really challenging days, but we're using that safe zone of the wash up to do that QI methodology to say, right, what went well? What's been a problem? Discharge summaries, TTOs, how can we fix it? Some of these are long historical issues and it'll take longer to sort them, but then there's the commitment and the willingness there to be able to do that. And as you say, timeline, it's no good identifying something on day one and being on day 8 or 9 or 10 or 2 weeks down the line and we still don't have a solution. So we're keeping that dialogue going. It's really important.
Thank you very much, Kim. Steve.
Yeah, really helpful. Two things really, just to reinforce the point that Robin made, which is that we've made significant improvements and we've got further to go. So our patients still experience at times waiting too long for an ambulance response, still experience at times waiting too long to move into the emergency department, and still at times experience waiting too long before admission into our ward and then discharge. So that creates challenges for our patients, it creates challenges for our staff, and I think it's quite right, Robin, that we recognise that and acknowledge that at the same time as celebrating the improvements that are being made. The other comment, I strongly support, David, us as a board writing to say thank you to Laura for the leadership role that she's played. I think Mary's quite right to identify that. I also think we should recognise the role that Mary has played as Chief Medical Officer in enabling that environment in a really very, very short space of time that you've been in the role for. So not wanting to embarrass you, Mary, but I think we should recognise and reflect in our board the impact and the leadership role that you've played really very, very successfully in enabling that. So thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you to everyone who's played such an important part in the improvements that we've been seeing. I do get letters from members of the public, which I always reply to, expressing their concern about urgent and emergency care. So I would like to say that we do understand as a board the challenges that have been faced and the difficulties that people have faced in accessing urgent and emergency care. And I think you and Robin have just said that, Steve. So I wouldn't want the public to think that there's any complacency. But I think when we do see some improvements and we start to see a bit of a trend of improvement, although there are still ups and downs, and we're by no means out of the woods. And Steve has also referenced the acute financial pressures we're under. I hope the members of the public will understand that we are working as hard as we possibly can, in my opinion, as a non-executive, to make progress and improve on these issues. but we do also recognise that urgent and emergency care across the whole of England, across the whole of UK, and increasingly actually across the whole of Europe, is having greater pressures. So it's a balance, isn't it, really, Steve, by recognising to the public that there's more to do, but also recognising that we are making progress.
Yes.
So perhaps we could note that, Lindsay. I will write to Dr. Wesson as an action from the board, and we're also recording our thanks to everybody who's been involved in the improvements that we've seen, because I think it is important to thank people and motivate them, while also recognising that there's more to do. Anything else from you on your report, Steve?
No, that's fine.
Thank you. Well, it was important to spend some time on those items. Are there any other questions or comments from Steve on any other parts of his report? Well, thank you then, Steve, for a very comprehensive report. And I think we note it, other than the issues we picked out for recording, Lindsay. So that takes us on then to item 8, which is the approach to review our trust strategy. Members of the board will remember that we had a board strategy session just to sort of check the external environment and the way it's moving, and to see if we need to reset our strategy. I think we all think that our values hold true: respect, compassion, honesty, and teamwork. But that in the light of a changing external environment and a new 10-year plan for the NHS, we perhaps need to revisit our own strategy. So could I invite Ella Tracy to come in? Ella's been shortlisted for the longest job title in Cornwall, so I'm not going to repeat it. But Ella, could I ask you to introduce yourself?
Yes, certainly. Hello, I'm the Chief Performance Partnerships and Transformation Officer, and it's only taken me about a year to be able to say that first time every time. So thank you for the introduction. And as you say, this paper is off the back of our strategy and development session held in February. The current trust strategy that we have is a 10-year strategy, and it was approved in 2022 to take us right through to 2032. We took great care at the time to engage widely in that strategy with partners, with our colleagues across the organisation and with the public. But I think we acknowledged when we did the review back in February that we were in a very different time. We were very much in a kind of post-pandemic landscape, in the kind of acute recovery phase, and things have really moved on a lot. So as often is the case when you take stock, you realise how far you've come. And whilst the current strategy have milestones that I think will remain true for the next 10 years, certainly things like the Women's and Children's Hospital that we've already discussed, and our ambitions around University Hospital. There's a lot of context that has moved and changed with a new government, with our own position in terms of the recovery and improvements we've made, and we want to take stock now and reflect that in our current strategy. We also think, in the context of the national picture becoming clearer around the things such as the Darcy report and the channel shift that we know is now the strategic intent of the NHS, we want to make sure we reflect that really clearly in our strategy, and as the acute hospital for Cornwall are really clear in the kind of unique and special role we play in that landscape. So that's the kind of context, and what we are aiming to do is set out in the paper. Our approach, we had good feedback last time, so essentially we want to do it a similar way in terms of engagement, but go even bigger on that, and we will be looking to set it very much in the context of the 10-year plan that will be coming out from the NHS nationally. We've put a time frame in the paper, and that's on page 5 of 6. And the intention is that our final draft strategy at this point in time, we'd be aiming to get that out by the end of June of this year. And the caveat that I put against that is that we don't have a specific date yet for when the 10-year strategy will be published. So there may be some movement with regard to that. But all of the engagement and the progress around drafting that new strategy will certainly be full steam ahead, and it'll be a case of us kind of checking that against the 10-year plan when it is published. So I think that's all I probably need to say, David. And the paper is there for reading. Really happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Ella. I think one thing I'm picking up is that possibly there's a need in our plan for an even greater focus on strategic communication and presenting the profile of our hospitals to the public, and also on people and culture issues. There may be other items as well which board members would like the refresh strategy to focus on, but those are just two things that I've picked up. Are there any comments? Richard Kramer?
Yeah, thank you, David. I mean, building on your points, I think there's two things. One is with staff about how we can use this not just to engage with the strategy, but take them on that journey of change, given constraints in terms of finances and also future commissioning intentions. And I think that's really important that we use that opportunity. And the second point, similar to the point I mentioned earlier around patient engagement, how we can ensure that we reach hard to reach groups rather than the patients that are easiest to access. So I suppose that second point is a question for Ella. How are we going to do that?
Do you want to pick that up now, Ella?
Yeah, so we have been doing work in terms of harder to reach groups, and we have kind of, I suppose, ambassadors for those. So we do have links in, Richard. So I think it'd be a case of really bringing them into this and asking them how they want to be engaged with and what is the best way to reach them. That's certainly something we'll do in a joined up way with our communications team internally and use their expertise on that.
Robin?
First thing I'd like to say is a thank you to Ella for making our strategy be something that we actually use now. So when we're looking at documents, when we're looking at how we're moving forward, it's much easier to tie in the themes that are clearer in the strategy work that's been done to date. That's enabled me to have the headspace to look at this document in a slightly different light and think, are we possibly being too ambitious with the timescales that we put in here for the refresh to think is an opportunity with the improvements we've made to date to possibly think, where would our overarching clinical strategy sit first? Should we finalise our urgent care, our planned care, our cancer care, our workforce strategic intents to then do the wider refresh that you're describing, Ella, which may make it a lot easier for us to go to the next level of how when teams are coming forward to say, I need to do this, we say, well, can we just link that back to where does it fit first against one of the underpinning planned care, urgent care, cancer, workforce pieces, and then the wider trust thing. So is it more a case of should we be looking to take longer to do this refresh, to do those underpinning bits first? Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. Can we come back to that point at the end to see what we want to do? Let me gather up further comments. Alison Thorne-Henderson, Dual Chief People Officer. Alison.
Thank you, Chair. So for me, I think our strategy has served us well, and I welcome the refresh. I just wanted to pick up around the change point, because I think one of the first questions we heard at the board today was about AI. So for me, there is something about when we do this refresh about not only how do we equip our staff to be change ready, but how do they cope with quite often multiple change initiatives at the same time. It'd be very easy to say, oh, well, we'll just restrict the amount of change that we're doing, but that's not going to be reality going forward. We know that we need to build a really resilient workforce to cope with the fact that something is happening within their team, or there's some changes happening within the department, as well as changes that are happening across the Cornwall system as a whole. So for me, I feel that our strategy served us well to date. I certainly wouldn't want to lose a lot of the elements that are in the current strategy. I think it's an overarching strategy, and then it helps us then to develop those departmental plans, whether it's workforce or clinical plans, in order to deliver the overarching strategy. Thank you.
And Ian Dean, Chief Financial Officer.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just to build on the comments, and thank Alan and the team for the work that they've done on this. I think it's really timely in terms of the national picture, and to refocus priorities in what's going to be a challenging next few years. I think one of my reflections would be that we need to make sure as a board and as an executive team we prioritise the time for it. So we've heard today about some of the exciting developments that will be a call on colleagues' time. I think it's just really important we reflect that this will need that kind of dedicated, focused time to make sure it is a strategy that fits us for the next few years.
Thank you, Ian. Any other comments for Ella to gather up? So we need to come back to Robin's point. I think my initial reaction would be that it's important rather than urgent. But clearly we can't have sort of planning blight for too long, because we have to be anchored in strategy so that people know that what they want to do is reflected back in our strategy. And there are lots of good things in the strategy already, so we're building on it rather than completely changing it. Ella, what would be your advice as the lead person on this? I mean, I thought that the process that you've set out seemed a pretty reasonable one to me, but what do you think, having heard the conversation?
Yeah, so as I think it is a relatively ambitious timeline. However, it was set in the context of this being a refresh, not a complete rewrite of our strategy, following our discussion. And I think a lot of what I think people have commented already, we're not looking to depart from the main strands of our existing strategy. It is around refreshing those. And the overarching trust strategy ought to be done first, so that our enabling strategies can be pinned on that. And I think we have a challenge there, Robin, around things such as our planned care strategy is already underway. I think we can do that in parallel. That's fine. We don't need to hold that up. And I've actually had a conversation with the team around this, how we would do it. So our preference would be to stick to doing the trust strategy first, and then, as Alison described, the underpinning enabling strategies. Previously, we didn't have those. We made a conscious decision not to have enabling strategies, and I think we've struggled a little bit with that. So my learning from that would be that people are seeking clarity around things such as, the planned care strategy, the urgent and emergency care strategy, our workforce strategy, our transformation and change strategy and approach to that. So I think there are probably 5 or 6 key supporting strategies that do need to sit underneath this.
Just in my experience of doing these things in other settings, I think it is quite important. If you think of the key enablers, people, money and things, infrastructure, to make sure that you do have strategies, making sure they don't trip over each other, so that your financial strategy is mapped onto your workforce strategy, is mapped onto the things that the workforce needs to do their jobs. So I've always found it quite helpful to have quite detailed enablers sitting underneath the key clinical core business strategy. But there might be other views as well. Steve?
Yeah, I think so. It's a great discussion. What I was going to suggest, having listened to it, is there are a number of things that have changed. New government, new priorities, the 10-year plan which is underway. I think it probably is relatively urgent for us to review our strategy in the context of those things. So I think this timeline does that. That wouldn't preclude us from then coming back to this towards the end of the year when those other enabling strategies are concluded, and they could further refine that going forward. I don't think any of us would see that this work would produce something that would never change going forward, and that might, Robin, address the kind of comments you're making, and it might reinforce our commitment to engagement with clinical colleagues across the organisation, because that might inform further kind of progression and development of the strategy. But where we do have context that we're aware of, where that has changed, I think we can refresh in the timeline that we've described. So I think I'm suggesting we use this timeline, but build in the opportunity to then review that strategy in the context of workforce, clinical strategy, financial kind of medium plan as well.
Thank you, Steve. Is the board happy with that way forward? The other point I think is just that it's quite important as a board that we give permission, as it were, for the executives to be thinking strategically and to have the headspace to be able to do that under the chief executive's leadership, because we all know the operational pressures, and strategy can often be driven out unless the board is determined to see it refreshed and to reflect the changing times that we live in. So can we take Steve's suggested way forward? Does that give you enough guidance from the board today, Ella, to proceed on your suggested timeline?
Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. So can we note the discussion then, please, Lindsay? And reflecting Steve's summary, continue with the strategy refresh on that basis. Thank you very much. I think the only thing that's standing between you and a break now is the Quality Assurance Committee, which obviously is one of our most important committees. Just before we go into the committee reports, I've been asked just to remind you that the non-executive committee chairs summarise the assurance sought at their meetings. And then executive directors obviously are free to add anything else that they would like the board to note. But really we look to our non-executive chairs to provide our assurance of the business of the committees. So could I turn then please to Isabel Down, the chair of the Quality Assurance Committee.
Thank you, Chair. And I immediately feel the pressure to get through this as quickly as possible so that people can get a very well-deserved break. However, as we will be aware, this is an important committee for the board, and it covers a huge range of issues led by a very committed group of non-executive and executive colleagues, and we meet monthly. It's worth also saying that we have a meeting separately to our Quality Assurance Committee, where we meet with our colleagues from Cornwall Partnership Trust every 2 months around the quality agenda. So there are some items that we discuss in that part 2, as we call it, meeting, which I'll mention briefly. But however, for the purposes of reporting today, you will have seen the report itself, which is fairly lengthy in the packs. So I'm not intending to go through it in any detail at all. I'll take it as read, but there are a few things I did just want to highlight that we covered over the January-February period as a committee. We haven't escalated anything to board for today, but we did sign off several items and endorse several items, including the really successful work that's been done by maternity and neonatal services. And I'm sure that Kim, when it comes to the maternity report, will say a bit more about that. Well, there's been a lot of discussion already today around the FLOW programme, the urgent and emergency care, and all the work that's going on. And of course, the committee is very committed to scrutinising and ensuring the quality and safety aspects of all the changes that are taking place, from looking at ambulance delays to looking at the elective waiting list, for example, in orthopaedics, to looking at our cost improvement programmes and what quality and safety impacts might flow from some of those changes. And we'll continue to be doing that clearly as the months go on. I think over the last few months, it's fair to say we've had a fairly forensic focus on 2 areas, really: management of harm and fractured neck of femur. And our Chief Medical Officer has been very involved in helping us think through those issues, and will be bringing further in-depth findings back to us in due course. I think the other area of concern is all around our stroke metrics. And again, as a committee, we'll be wanting to really get underneath the surface of those to really understand what the plans are in terms of improvements around our stroke service. I've mentioned maternity and neonates, so I won't dwell on that, but it is worth saying that we are compliant for RCHT, or MIS, I think it's now called. I'm going to use acronyms, and I'm sure my Deputy Chief Executive will correct me when she speaks in a moment to tell me what they stand for. But clinical negligence scheme, we have met the due requirements for that again. A couple of things just to flag up, just for some concern really, which didn't necessarily feature heavily in our meetings, but I wanted the board to be aware. We are quite concerned about the inappropriate access to patient and staff records. And this seems to be a growing problem that I think in terms of quality and safety, we will want to shed a light on that issue in the next month. And I think just finally also to say that in terms of all the work that's going on around the changes that we've discussed already today, we have requested a 3-month post evaluation of all those changes, which our Chief Medical Officer will bring back to the Quality Committee so that we can really clear about any potential impact on quality and safety from the changes that are being implemented as we speak. And I think finally, just in terms of the meeting that we have with Cornwall Partnership Trust, which is a really welcome opportunity that we have to look at those areas of integration across both organisations. So we focus on those particular areas, and we had some really good scrutiny of assurance around integrated safeguarding, which is a major issue, our falls prevention and what we can be doing both internally as an organisation, but also more widely as a system to encourage improvements around falls prevention, and also in seeking a reduction in pressure ulcers, which we know is a real concern for some of our patients that we have with us. So I think I'll just pause at that point because, as I say, the report is self-explanatory and my voice is probably going by now and we probably need a break. So thank you. I'll pass you back, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Isabel. The committee covers a huge amount of work. Any questions or comments for Isabel? Mary, is there anything you wanted to say about fractured neck of femur?
I can absolutely update. So we've been doing a lot of work to improve our fractured neck of femur pathway. And there is currently a clinically led task and finish group specifically focusing down on that particular pathway, being supported externally by Rick Strang. And the pathway is to be launched in its entirety in its reformed state mid-March, but we're already seeing elements of the new pathway in place and producing improvements, particularly around time to theatre, so aiming to get patients to theatre within 36 hours of admission, and also right patient to right place, so people admitted directly to the trauma unit. Whilst our figures on both of those aren't where we would want them to be, we've seen them both improve. That is partly due to the renewed focus specifically on the fractured neck of femur pathway, but it's also an outcome of the bigger picture in terms of the clinical vision of flow and the work that we've already described to allow us to have that flow through the hospital so that we are getting the patients in a timely fashion to the correct place. So I'm much more reassured that we're going in the right direction now than perhaps I would have been if I'd been asked the same question 3 months ago. And I'm really confident that when we've put the entirety of the new pathway in place, which has many different elements to it, including use of digital systems so that everybody's got one view of the pathway, etc., that we'll be in a much better position. So our trajectory is going in the right direction.
Thank you very much, Mary. Alison.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Isabel for highlighting the particular issue that we've got in regards to data breaches. That is an unfortunate situation, so I'd really encourage staff that are listening in to today to ensure that they are not inappropriately accessing patient, staff or their own medical records. And you know, if you're not up to date with the data protection training, just to refer back to that, because as I say, we are doing more and more audits, and it's not a nice place to be to discover that actually we have staff that are breaching these records. Thank you.
Anything else for Isabel? I can't see anything. Can you see anything as well?
No, thankfully, no.
Just going back to the previous item on strategy, Company Secretary has put a note in the chat changing the resolution, which people have been indicating they support. So I think we could take that as supported for the minutes, Lindsay.
And perhaps just on that, as we're meeting in public, it might be worth asking Lindsay just to read out the resolution, just so we've got that as a public record, if that's okay, David and Lindsay.
Could you do that, please, Lindsay?
Yeah, of course, yeah. So the suggested change to the resolution for item 8, the approach to the review of RCHT trust strategy, is that the board has resolved to discuss and approve the proposed approach to refreshing the trust strategy and notes a further review, including clinical engagement, when enabling strategies have concluded, and builds further the strategy in the context of the medium and long-term financial plan and our workforce changes.
Is the board content? Thank you very much for that.
I have a comment, sorry, I
Yes.
want to be really clear that clinical engagement, sorry, apologies, I want to be really clear that clinical engagement would be throughout, not just when we've concluded. It sounds a little as if we would engage with clinicians after we've concluded, which would absolutely not be the intent. It would be throughout the development of our strategies.
Critically led strategy. So could we amend it to indicate that the whole strategy is clinically led?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Board happy with that? Okay, thank you. There are 10 indications in the chat that the board is content. Yeah, thank you very much. So going back to Quality Assurance Committee, there are no matters being escalated to the board. So with thanks to the committee and to Isabel, I think we should note the report from January 2025 and February 2025 meetings of the Quality Assurance Committee, having noted the actions from board members during the conversation. Is that okay? So I think we can break at this point. It's just coming up to 10 to 11. Sorry.
Maternity, CQC.
Oh, yes, I've
got to go a little bit longer.
Sorry, yes. I was jumping ahead of myself. On item 9, we've got 9.1, the Maternity and Neonatal Safety Monthly Report. Kim.
I'm standing between coffee now, I've got the hint. So really important, I'm going to be brief, it's covered in in Isabel's report. Please, I just want to continue to note the fragility of our neonatal staffing services, which is both a regional and national problem. We are still implementing all of the mitigations listed, and whilst it still remains challenging, we have not had to reduce any of our neonatal services, which is really important for our citizens of our community and keeping our babies and families together in county, receiving the care they require. The medical gases issue we spoke about at committee. We absolutely fully recognise it's a single point of delivery. The issue that was raised was actually the safe storage of the additional oxygen or medical gases supplies required, and Brian and Estates has got that in hand, and we will monitor that. And we spoke a lot about the importance of having safety champions at board level, and as Adrian is the NED overseeing our non-executive director overseeing women and children's, I was really privileged to be able to do a full maternity journey walk around with Matt Hill, who's now our non-executive director for women and children's. And I didn't know if you wanted to add anything, Matt, of the importance of that safety champion role at a board level and fresh eyes.
Thank you. It was a wonderful experience walking around and seeing how staff approach the work, the real positivity, the change that have been made, the relationships between them. It's just an incredibly positive sense of team that I gained as I walked around, and really good to have the maternity neonatal voice there as well from Nikki, just understanding how we're working with service users to really shape the experience. It's interesting coming in from previous work and understanding how things are landing. but I think yeah, the fresh eyes and seeing things and being able to appreciate the great work and identify areas where there are potential improvements, and I hope it's going to be a really positive experience for myself and others coming in the future. So I've got my phone going off. There's a lot going on in maternity space. There's a lot nationally going on, and I don't think RCHT is very different in some of the challenges we're facing, but contextually and geographically, there's other aspects that play into this. And I think one of the key concerns, I suppose, is the recruitment, retention of staff and how we get a staffing model correct to really support the work we're doing going forwards. And I wonder about how some of this plays into the strategy that Ella was talking about earlier, about how we cope with things when there's a national and probably international shortage of perinatal staff.
Thank you, Matt. Any comments, questions for Kim or Matt? Usma?
Thank you. And Matt's touched on it a little bit, but with the staffing shortage you said is national, I also noted later on in the report, Alison mentioned a really successful careers day that we had here. Is it something that we can long-term be nurturing in the Southwest, in Cornwall? And do you know do you have indications of why we have these shortages? Are there specific reasons why, graduates aren't wanting to enter this field?
So I think I think nursing as a whole has had some really bad press over the recent times, and we can really feel with the Lucy Letby that impact on wanting to choose neonates as a specialty. We're working really hard internally as well as regionally, which will input in national. There is a national piece of work being done on national job descriptions and banding. Now, we know internally that where we've had issues before, such as oncology, we've done a program that says, come and join us. We will give you this program of work with the right training, and in 12 months, you can move from a band 5 to a band 6. You've got to be really, really careful, because this is, why wouldn't we do it for everyone? But for these hard to reach specialties, such as neonates and oncology, that's something we're looking at for neonates going forward, both regionally and nationally, to say what do we need to do differently that not only attracts or gets people to go in, but actually retain them so we don't lose them. So we have taken some staff that have paediatric experience now, and they are looking at what upskilling we need, and that's a longer term burn, but we've still got to make sure we've got the right, not just numbers, skill on duty, and we're not onerously putting on those so they're not overburdened with training. So we're doing everything we can, both internally, regionally, and inputting and nationally, to try and do whatever we can to make this a viable career option.
Other comments? So I think we're...
Alison as well.
Oh, Alison, please.
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Kim's saying. Potentially over the next couple of years within the Southwest, we might have a oversupply of nurses being trained. I've lost the board, so I'm hoping everybody's still there. I'm going to keep talking. And I think it's really important that universities are working very closely with providers around areas such as neonates, where we do have the skill shortages, and indeed mental health as well be another area that we are seeing shortages, because those expectations need to be set on career paths to those students that are coming through universities now. Thank you, and I'm hoping I haven't lost everybody.
A very important point. So just looking around if there are any other comments. Can't see any. I think we're invited to note the current position in relation to the risks regarding neonatal nursing staffing and progress made in terms of recruitment. Note the single point of failure and current mitigation regarding the single air supply to the Princess Alexandra wing and the actions being taken. And then finally, note the positive feedback regarding both maternity and neonatal services following the recent Patient Safety Champions walk around. Okay, thank you. That takes us on then to item 9.2, the CQC inspection reports on urgency and emergency care and the Xeno ward. Kim?
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, I'll take the paper as read. We know that our Care Quality Commission came and did our urgent and emergency care inspection in May 2024. We had our Xeno ward, which is one of our medical wards, single frame inspection in July 2024. Both were published on the 6th of January. There were no regulatory breaches for Xeno ward, but there were 2 regulatory breaches in our urgent and emergency pathway. Regulation 12 relates to timely treatment, and you've heard a lot of us talk today about right care, right time, right place. And the second one was Regulation 18, which is our appraisal rate. We submitted both action plans on the 13th of February. Please note that the UN Urgent and Emergency Care Action Plan covers our system actions as well as our internal. Our flow is wider than just a single provider, hence that's a more overarching and complex action plan, but both have been submitted and we'll be speaking about those with our regulators in our next relationship meeting. I think it links really closely to the discussion that was had around our flow risk and the work we're doing, as well as what Steve, our Chief Exec Officer, said. So our risk, as we know, is 25 in ED, and we have a metric that's called an aggregated patient delay metric, which is measured over 30 days. And the reason why it was 25 is it was 18,000, which is absolutely in the highest tolerance range, which has linked to why this action plan is system-wide. With all of the work that we're undertaking, as of today, on a 30-day rolling programme, it is 11,400. So we will be reviewing the 25 risk for ED before our next risk committee. But it's a real testament if we're looking at a quality metric that we can see that reducing. Most importantly, it's sustaining that reduction. We'd like to get down to 6,000, which it was prior to COVID, but acknowledging all of the work hopefully will get us to that position. And I will leave it there.
Thank you very much, Kim. Any comments or questions for Kim on these quite encouraging reports overall?
Just for me on the CQC assurance report, I mean, it is a shame that there was a breach because we didn't receive the persons employed by the service didn't have regular appraisals. And so I just want to, I think there's a lesson here, an opportunity in terms of our communication with staff, how these things matter, because they will be picked up by our regulators if we don't. And also, how are we doing in terms of getting to the 90% appraisals, which is our target?
Thank you. So, Richard, as you can see on the action plan, there's a very tight timeline on being able to do this. That's why it's pivotal as well. How do we create the time with the current operational pressures as well as other pressures? But I'm encouraged with the senior team, because this is wider than nursing midwifery, that there's a multidisciplinary team in, that we do this collectively. And if there's any lessons to learn, how do we collectively share that? So we know it works well in maternity, but we have to acknowledge the slight differences. But is there any common theme that we can do? It is measured. We have a monthly what I would call check and challenge with the central team. Bernie leads it for myself with this team to make sure that we're kept on track, or it's escalated prior to that if we're going off track.
Thank you.
I think then we've got Robin Jones and then Alison Thorne-Henderson. Robin.
I just wanted to acknowledge the work that Kim's team have done with the risk scoring ED. So for a long time, it felt very subjective how we were talking about the scoring of the risk. And now we've got with our clinical leaders a defined measure of that risk score. And we're able to make that really transparent. So it's on our daily dashboard. So it's aggregated patient delay, as you say, Kim, but that move is really significant because everybody in our trust can access the daily dashboard. Everybody can see how we're moving that indicator. And as that comes down, then the risk score will move accordingly and not be a subjective call. And I think that that's just another demonstration of how we've matured in our approach to managing the pressures in the emergency department. So just to say thank you, Kim.
Thanks, Robin. Alison?
Yeah, I was just going to answer Richard's question about how we're doing against our 90% target. We have, for the first time in 2 years, taken a dip. This month, we were gradually creeping up towards that target. So it is disappointing, however, also a little bit understandable given the operational pressures and planning that's going on at the moment. We've done a lot in terms of the actual appraisal process to make it as flexible as possible. We encourage people to get out and about from their clinical settings or from their office to actually spend a few minutes, you know, where possible, walking and talking. It doesn't have to be done sat over a desk. And, you know, with the flexibility we've built into the appraisal system as well, it is about an opportunity to thank staff, to make sure that we are reflecting on our trust values. It doesn't have to be as rigid about career development, depending on the individual's personal circumstances and what they are looking for in terms of their career, where they are in their career with us in RCHT. Thank you.
Are there any other comments? Kim, did you want to come back?
Yeah, so Robin, thank you. I think this is another example of how we get that clinical engagement early. So a big thank you to Mark Jadaf, who worked really closely with the team, because it's one, you know, governance can sometimes be perceived over here, but governance is driven by clinical engagement and clinical decision. So it's a real powerful lesson how we continue to engage with the teams to make sure we've got the right quality metrics that absolutely, as you said, drives the risk, and there can't be any subjectiveness or pushback on that. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. So I think we should move on if there are no more comments. I think it's worth noting that these were inspection reports from May 2024 and July 2024. And as reported, things have changed since then. And they weren't published until the 6th of January 2025. And I think we should also note that an action plan was developed and submitted to the Care Quality Commission in response to those two identified regulation breaches. And that was done by the time frame specified, which was the 13th of February 2025. Are there any other points that we ought to record, Lindsay, or are you content with that? Is the board happy to record those points? With thanks to Kim and colleagues for the work that's gone on in developing the action plan. So I'm sorry I was a bit premature earlier, but unless somebody kicks me under the table, I think we can have a break now. We're running slightly late, but I'm not panicking yet. I think we can recover it after the break. So we'll take the full 15 minutes, which means that we should come back at just before 20 past. So can we reconvene at certainly no later than 20 past? Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. So welcome back if you didn't hear me. I think we can restart if everybody's ready. We go on now to our Journey of Improvement section of the agenda. Item 10, Finance and Performance Committee Assurance Report to Board. Adrian Davis chaired his first meeting of Finance and Performance Committee. So, Adrian, could you take us into this, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. As you say, this was my first meeting, the February meeting, was my first meeting as chair, and the first thing I wanted to do was acknowledge and pay tribute to the amount of work that goes on behind the scene to enable the committees to function and discharge their terms of reference. So a big thank you to the team for that. I don't intend going through the paper in detail. I'm going to take it as read. The full list of recommendations that were taken by the committee are on pack page 104 and 105, but there were just a couple of areas that I wanted to enlarge upon with regards to the debate that was had in the committee meetings. The first of those revolved around e-care, and in January we were talking about the potential unrealisation of benefits associated with the e-care project. And in the February meeting, it was apparent that there may be a delay to the delivery of the e-care project from November of this year to March, April next year. And there was a discussion around the potential financial impacts of that, and also how it impacts on the planning submission for 25-26. So we have asked as a committee for some further detail around that. The second issue that I wanted to raise was the draft high-level plan that's gone in for 25-26 and the level of challenge that there is for the trust in meeting those cost improvement plans. As a committee, we wanted to record our concern about deliverability if that figure should rise any more through the ongoing submissions that will be required. Having said that, we finished really with an acknowledgement for the good work that's gone on across the trust over the last 10 months to get us to the position where we've got growing confidence that we're going to come in as per plan on a balanced budget. And I'll leave it at that, Chair, and take questions if there are any further questions.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Are there any comments or questions for Adrian? Okay.
Sorry, David.
Sorry, Richard, yes.
Yes, I just wanted to ask about the cash balance. I suppose it's more of a question for Ian, because it's we're cash balance ended January 2025 is 6.3 million. So I just want to know if we can say a little bit more about that, as we're 5 million up and hoping to make this up, or an element of that, by the end of the financial year, and how we're going to do that.
Thank you. We're coming on to the financial report. Ian, do you want to take that now or under your report?
I'll cover it under the report, Chair, if you're happy with that.
Sorry, what did he say? Can't hear
Sorry,
you.
can you hear me? I said no, hang on.
Oh, yeah.
Can you, yeah?
Cover it,
I'll cover it under the report, Chair, if that's all right.
Okay.
But thank you, Richard, for the question.
So I don't know if you all heard that. We've had some difficulty in hearing Ian, but we're just coming to his financial report, so we'll cover it then, if that's all right, Richard. Yep. So could we note the report from the January and February 2025 meetings of the Finance and Performance Committee, and then move on, having noted the concerns that Adrian raised about the financial position, if there is any more to come, as it were. And then move on to 10.1, which is the month 10 revenue financial report. So could you pick up the cash issue, which I know a lot of us are concerned about, Ian, in your report?
Yeah, absolutely, Chair. Thank you, and hopefully you can hear me okay now. So yeah, this is the month 10 report. So we're well through the year now. The in-month position, I'll take the paper as read, but I'll just pull out a couple of key highlights. The in-month position was a small surplus against the plan of £100,000, and that takes us cumulatively now to 2.2 million adverse to plan. And that's a marked improvement from where we were at kind of the midpoint of the year. I want to just kind of thank people for the engagement that they've had with the control total letters that we issued out to each department. So this was around having that focus between a couple of months ago now, back in early January, and the end of the year, in terms of making sure we land that year-end position where we want to. So we saw the benefit of that. We saw a positive response from departments to that challenge that we set out in those letters. We've seen that play through in month 10, and we are continuing to see that in the improving forecasts. So really, that's one of our key focuses, as colleagues will expect at this time of year, is making sure we land that year-end position consistent with our plan, our statutory duty as an organisation, and our collective ambition as a wider integrated care system. So we remain on track for that. We've got improvement in our forecast. So we were forecasting a deficit of around about 4 million. That's coming down slightly based on the most recent information that I've seen. And we've also had very positive discussions with the Integrated Care Board around some non-recurrent support that the broader system can provide that will enable us to get to that break-even year-end position. So as Adrian touched on, confidence around that is increasing, and I'd expect to be seeing, when we report back at month 11, an improvement from that current 2.2 million adverse to plan towards that break-even position by the end of the year. There's a couple of points to pick out in terms of positives. We continue to see a good reduction and sustained reduction in our agency spend at just below £1 million a month, and there's further work ongoing around that. The focus, building on what I've said there, is into 25-26, and that challenge that Adrian rightly described, we talked about in some detail at the committee. Getting our run rate down into the new financial year, so from the 1st of April, is going to be a key part of that. And colleagues will have noticed in Steve's report, his Chief Exec's report, in response to that, the organisation has taken the step of securing some external temporary support in the form of Improvement Director to drive that increase in confidence around our savings and deliverability, but also in terms of actionable steps that we can take to reduce our current run rate of expenditure. In terms of the cash question specifically, so in the report at the end of January, our cash position was 6.3 million, which was below the plan at that point. That has fairly significantly improved through February. So one of the key elements around that was memorandum of understandings that we needed to receive to allow us to draw down some of our public dividend funding for some of our capital schemes. A number of those have now been completed during February ahead of the year end and the final requirements to draw down cash ahead of year end. And also linked to that, we've obviously, as we get to this stage in the year, there's more clarity and certainty on some of the elements where we've got transactions that haven't been cash backed at that point. So the positive position is that will have significantly improved. So at the end of February, we were up at £28 million of cash. So we'd received £13 million of PDC, public dividend capital funding, during the month of February, which made a key part in that. Now, some of that will be timing, because we'll be spending a significant proportion of that in March. But I feel confident that our year-end forecast will be significantly higher than the plan, which was for a cash balance of £1 million. But it will still be an area that we have to keep a really close focus on, certainly into the first half of next year, and the delivery of those savings plans into 25-26. So I'll probably pause at that, Chair, but happy to take any further questions or clarifications.
Thank you very much. Can I just go back to Richard first to see if he's content with that?
I'm happy, thank you.
Thank you, Ian, and I know you are keeping a very close eye on our cash. Any comments or questions for Chief Financial Officer? So, if not,
I don't know why it happens.
Just keep the microphone muted.
I haven't got my microphone on. Okay, thank you. I hadn't touched it, but anyway, never mind. I just wanted to pay tribute to Ian, really, and say thank you to him. As a non-exec, and probably not terribly up with the finances, not to the extent I should be anyway, certainly now. Ian was very generous with his time and gave me some one-to-one coaching, going through the financial plan, going through all the dumb questions that I would not have wanted to ask in an open forum at board. I was able to ask offline to Ian, and he was really generous with his time and explained to me in a way that I now completely understand it, so feel very much more confident. So it was just a thank you to Ian, really.
Thank you as well. Thank you, Ian. I think it is fair to say, Steve, that we are one of the systems that is in financially better shape, at least as we sit here today, than many.
So that's absolutely right. We won't know until we get to the end of the year, but I think the indications are there might be only a small number of health and care systems around the country in a 3, 4 or 5 kind of number out of the 42 that may end up in a financially balanced position for this year. We certainly expect to be one of those. So I think that shows the challenge across the whole NHS, but also shows the level of delivery in Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly and in Royal Cornwall Hospital's NHS Trust. So I think that reflects a huge amount of work. And we know that those things have an impact. NHS England have been very clear on the incentive, revenue and capital funding which will be provided next year for those organisations and those systems who achieve financial balance and live within their means this year. And they're not insignificant sums. It might be worth asking Ian just to really briefly summarise the kind of incentive that we think is available to those organisations and systems that do deliver a break-even position.
Would you like to do that now?
I think if Ian, if you don't mind, could you give that summary?
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, and it's an important reminder, Steve, particularly from the level of challenge that existed at the start of this year when we set this year's financial plan, and a similar feeling going into next year. So, yeah, the across capital and revenue, originally it was set at 12.2 million, so 6.1 million of incentive capital and 6.1 million of incentive revenue funding. That subsequently increased slightly, so 8.4 million of revenue incentive and similarly of capital incentive. And on top of that, there is an expectation that for those systems that achieve that, there will be a further bonus on top of that. And for our system, that's around about 30%. So we again would be a significant another £2.6 million. And they're really important things to help us make sure we can continue to become more financially sustainable alongside all the actions we are taking. So yeah, really important things, and recognition of, as you said, Chair, that we're in a growing minority in terms of being able to continue to deliver financial balance.
Thank you, Ian. I'm going to move on, if the board is content, because we are starting to have to watch the clock now. So what we're invited to do, with thanks to Ian, is to note the January month 10 financial position, which with a small favourable variance in month remains adverse to plan by 2.2 million for the year to date. I mean, not necessarily for recording, but I think it's worth noting that we remain confident of breaking even by the end of March, as we sit here today.
Yes.
And then noting that the Trust and the wider system continues to report an external forecast of break-even. So not just us, but the whole Cornwall and Isles of Scilly system at this stage of the financial year. But that's based on the actions being taken and that there are risks associated with this. And then just going back, if I may, to the first item, where I mentioned one of Adrian's caveats. What the board member has noted in the chat that we should also note the risks to e-care as well, please, Lindsay, as well as any extra financial pressures that might come from the system. So if we could do that, that would be very helpful. Can we move on then to item 10.2? Ian, you've set it out very clearly, and I think the position is straightforward as we sit here today. So if you could just briefly introduce it, that would help us. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, Chair. I wasn't going to spend too long on this one. So this is a capital report in the usual format. The key element at this time of year is making sure we maximise patient benefit from our capital spend. So the capital approvals group considered the potential slippage between now and the end of March on some of the schemes at its most recent meeting, and you see outlined in the paper the reprioritisation that the group undertook. Most of that reprioritisation is within the delegated authority of committees at a level below board, but there is one item which is the timing of when we take receipt of the replacement linear accelerator, which is a significant item at £2.2 million. So that's been ordered for some time. It's actually able to be delivered in this financial year now. And so what is proposed is that using some of the slippage that we've had on other schemes this year, that we bring forward the timing of that, which is naturally going to happen in this financial year now anyway, which is really helpful. That's a key part of our replacement strategy, and something that the board has previously approved, albeit in the 25-26 capital programme. So yeah, and then the schemes that have slipped will be offset in next year's programme. And we'll update that when we bring that back to board in due course. So happy just to pause there, Chair, and take any questions.
Great, thank you, Ian. Questions, comments for Ian? The linear accelerator, of course, has already been approved, so it's a question of which financial year it falls in. Okay, so we've got a number of things to note. I think they're too long to read out, if you don't mind, but they're all on the paper. And of course, they reflect the fact, as we all know, with capital, it does vary in terms of timing according to how the schemes are progressing or whether any are accelerated. But it's all set out clearly in the paperwork, and I think it's straightforward for us to note those items if the board is content. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Ian. That takes us on then to 10.3, which is the productivity report. I know that we have somebody joining us, or was going to join us at 11:30, Lindsay. Is she
Sarah Coulter is in the meeting, Chair.
Okay. So, Sarah, if you can hear me, could you bear with us for 5 minutes or so, and then we'll come to you, if that's acceptable?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your forbearance. So item 10.3 is the productivity report. Ella, could you introduce this, please?
Yep, certainly, and I'll be relatively quick, I think. So this is our regular report reviewing our productivity position. Nationally, the NHS has faced a significant reduction in productivity post-COVID, and as a result, as a trust, we are responding to that with a productivity improvement approach. There's two sets of productivity data, so I just want to outline the position against both of those. We're in a period of transition within the NHS to a new set of data, but it's important we are monitoring against the old set, and then we are now transitioning to the new. Our original challenge at the start of this year was that we had a 19.6% reduction in our productivity since 1920, and that set us as benchmarking relatively low in the NHS, and therefore a real challenge for us as a trust, but also an opportunity to improve. Against that set of metrics, we are now at 16.5%. So we've improved 3% within the year, and that's against the national average year-to-date improvement of 1.8%. So as a trust, against the original productivity metrics, we are improving at a faster rate than the national average, however, against a relatively lower benchmark. The new data packs have now been published, and increasingly we're focusing our energies on monitoring against these, and certainly playing into the planning for next year, we're using the new data pack. Interestingly, the Royal Cornwall Hospitals in the new data set is at a minus 9.7 decline in productivity since 1920. And that's set against the national average of 11%. So with the new way of measuring productivity, we're actually performing ahead of the national average as at month 6. However, still with significant room for improvement at the 9.7%. So we have been advised by national teams that we're transitioning to the new metrics. We're in effect kind of doing shadow reporting with both at present time. And as I said earlier, our CIP and planning for next year needs to be set against that new data set. We're very much focusing our CIP programme around the opportunities that are outlined in this report for us from a productivity perspective. In total, the financial opportunity from the NHS data packs for us is a £38.2 million productivity opportunity, with 29.2 million of that being cash releasing. However, it is important to note that those figures are being reviewed and validated with our teams, and they are, obviously reflecting averages, but really significant opportunity in there. And I think important context for us as we go into considering our financial plan for next year and the scale of the challenge that we are facing. So we're going through a really detailed review of all of the benchmarking that's outlined in this pack, with our operational, with our clinical and with our corporate teams, with the aim of reflecting that in our cost improvement plans for next year. And within the next 2 weeks, therefore, by the time we submit our final plan, we'd be able to model through what our productivity gains would mean when we have our final plan in place. I'll stop there, and again, really happy to take questions. Thank you.
Questions or comments for Ella? I mean, I imagine that with Sir Jim Mackey coming in as interim chief executive, there'll be even more of a focus on productivity. But I wouldn't want staff to think from these reports that they're unproductive, because of course productivity has a lot to do with capital investment and having the equipment and the facilities in order to be productive. And I think, certainly I'm speaking personally, I think we have to think about the huge strain on staff from the pandemic and recovering from the pandemic, and now catching up with all the ill health that resulted from the pandemic. So I think probably there's plenty of factors which explain the alleged lack of productivity compared with before the pandemic, but nevertheless, clearly we do as a system to have to be more productive. But I just wanted to put that bit of context around it, particularly for staff who may be watching this. Isabel? Alison, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, for a similar thing, Chair, that I wanted to say thank you to all staff for working so hard, because these numbers are quite hard to understand in terms of the productivity metrics. Thank you for Ella for explaining it so well. I just had a question, which was, now that we've got the new pack and the new methodology, and really sort of noting that improved position compared to national, in terms of the improvements we've made in productivity, has that new set of data been communicated to the ICB and wider system? Thank you.
Alison, I think the short answer is yes. But
yeah, I'm happy to comment on that. It has been, and I think NHS England nationally, Alison, have been absolutely clear that the two metrics will run in parallel during March and April, and then the old metrics will be ceased, and the only productivity information we have going forward will then be the new metrics, and those new ones are the ones that Ella briefed on, that show nationally there's been about an 11% decline in productivity since 1920, and in our case that decline is at a lower level, a better level if you like, at 9.7%. so that's the core consistent single productivity information which will be used going forward. Our board would monitor that, but so would the Integrated Care Board, and so would NHS England. So I think the answer is yes. We'll just have this period for this month and next month where both sets of information will be available during that transition.
Thank you, Steve. Happy with that, Alison? Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions for Ella? If not, I'm going to move us on by noting the progress against the actions to date and noting the published productivity position as at month 6 and the internal forecast productivity for month 7. And if the board agrees, perhaps we could just note the context that Steve and I put around the productivity report. So that brings us on to the valued and supported people part of our agenda. And with apologies, Sarah, for delaying you, I would like to introduce Sarah Coulter, who's the guardian of safe working hours, to highlight to the board the key risks and issues arising from your quarterly report, Sarah.
Lovely, thank you. So from Q3 is still really the first half of the doctor year, if we bear in mind that they start in August, so we always do expect the numbers to be higher in this quarter, and certainly they have been this time. There'll always be peaks and troughs in different specialties, and that's down to a variety of factors, including keenness to exception report, efficiency and time management of the doctors, and whether they've got short-term rotational gaps. So a peak in a specialty isn't always a cause for concern. It's only if it's a sustained peak or if the numbers are particularly high. So just there's a couple of them I just really wanted to highlight this time. And then one of them was surgery. I think you recall from last time I was getting very concerned regarding the high numbers in surgery. And in my report, I've probably not done them justice by just saying it was the change in rotation. The senior surgical team actually made some quite significant changes as well. They discouraged the late ward rounds from their middle grades. Ward rounds create jobs, and as you can imagine, late ward rounds create late jobs, which makes people stay late. And they also introduced an extra SHO grade doctor on one of the problem wards as well. So that has seen an improvement, and that's seen so far a sustained improvement. The main concern, as I've said many times, unfortunately, is the oral and max-fax surgery. They're a small number. They report a lot, particularly on the weekends, and they report for high numbers on the weekends as well. They had a work schedule review last April, which temporarily did improve things, but unfortunately we're back to where we were. I've raised it with the team and I've asked her for them to relook at the work schedule. Whether it's comfort to anyone or not, I don't know, but this is not an RCHT oral and max-fax problem. This is an oral and max-fax problem, certainly in the Southwest. I think all but one trust is struggling with the same issues. That was probably all I really wanted to say from exception reports. You'll see I've noted again regarding the rest facilities. A few years ago, we managed to secure 2 rooms in the tower, which have now been converted and are being used for rest facilities. Those doctors working, particularly overnight in Trelawney, find it's a bit too far away to be able to get the break. So we are still looking for any extra space in Trelawney, acknowledging kind of the problems involved with that. And finally, I'm not going to dwell on this issue because I'm sure people in the room know more about this than I do, but that was about the proposed withdrawal of the hospital at night service. As you can imagine, it caused a lot of upset from the resident doctors. They often aren't able to take their breaks overnight, so anything kind of that is going to involve even more work for them was not particularly well received. I've not really had much of an update on that recently, but I just really wanted to highlight that that hugely impacts the resident doctors. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you for highlighting those points. Are there any comments or questions for Sarah? Uzma?
I just had a question about the finding that additional space for junior doctors to rest. Once that space is found, I wonder whether you, Richard, would be able to comment on whether we can use charitable funds to help with making the space more comfortable, whether that's been done before. I just thought obviously the issue is finding the space, but once the space is found, just wondered if that was something that could be considered.
I just added something at this time. Never want to refuse money, but we do still have some left over from the Fatigue and Facilities Charter.
Okay.
So we do have some funding for it that we kind of have set aside, but thank you.
Do you want to respond, Richard?
No, I think it's a very good point, and the committee are well aware that we don't have enough ideas for projects coming to us, and are going to cover later the success we've had in terms of renovation of the Mermaid Theatre. So it's something to note. If there's funding available, let's use that first, but if there's not, I'm sure it's something the Charitable Funds Committee can look at.
Thank you, Richard. I think next is Ella. Mary, did you have your hand up?
I did, and it looks like it's gone down, but I'm happy to wait for Ella if she wants to do her.
Okay, then so can we take Ella and then Mary?
Yeah, mine links to the point around that finding that space. So Sarah, I don't know to what extent you've already had those conversations, but I'd be really willing to sit down with you and look at where the space could be. I, about a year ago, did a big audit of all the space on our sites, and I don't know if that data's been kind of offered and shared with you. So perhaps we could take a look together with Brian, our Director of Estates.
Yeah, that would be amazing. It's been Niall Moon, who's been our chief resident, who's been lead on that. So I'll, yeah, if that's okay, I'll get him to come and join us. Amazing, thank you.
Mary.
Yeah, thank you. The first thing I wanted to say was thank you to Sarah. And you'll be more familiar with Sarah than me for these reports over the time she's been in post. But she does so much more than the paper. So I just wanted to say thank you. And I know we're looking to succession plans. So at that point, it will be a huge loss. But thank you for that, Sarah. I wanted to pick up on a couple of points around oral max facts. This report flagged that as an issue to me, and I hadn't previously been aware. I've been linking in with the Responsible Care Group about this. They, at the leadership level, were also unaware. So they're now linking in with, I think it's Tanya Lemurs is the appropriate person within OMFS to really try and get under the skin of that, to see if there's anything that they can do to support the team to see if we can turn this around. So that's helpful, and they are looking at that. The only other thing I was going to just mention was that in terms of the space, I've also been linking in with Niall, the chief resident, and we flagged it to Brian to see if there's anything he can identify. So if you're also linking in with Ella, that's probably all the right people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Happy to move on. So could I thank you very much for your report, Sarah, and for presenting it so clearly.
Thank you.
I think we need to receive and note the quarter three 24-25 report from the Guardian of Safe Working Hours. And there's the issue of charitable funds referral to note, and also the space issue to note. Board content? Thank you. So thank you for bearing with us, Sarah. You're very welcome to stay, but I'm sure you would prefer to go.
Thank you. I will go. Thank you.
Thank you. That takes us on to People and Culture Committee. And Adam Broom will present this because this was Adam's last meeting, I think, as chair, now that Richard Kramer has taken over as chair. I just wanted to say, Adam, the matters you're escalating could take a whole board meeting to discuss. The chief executive's had them under advisement since the meeting. So what I'd suggest is if you raise those areas you want to escalate, plus any others, we then ask Steve for his response to the escalation, because that will bring us up to date. Is that okay?
Perfect, thank you. So thank you. As David said, in front of us, we have the assurance report for the January People and Culture Committee, which, as David said, will be my last meeting. So I need to firstly put on record my thanks to Alison and the People and OD team, the committee members and the governance team for all their support and hard work for the time that I was the chair of the committee. And again, as David said, I'm handing over to the very capable hands of Richard to become the chair of the meeting from the March committee meeting. Currently, the People and Culture Committee meets every other month. We have a planned new way forward from the new governance year from April 2025. The intention is for the committee to meet every month, with every other month being the same as we currently operate, with the meetings in between being focused very specifically on strategic issues, which very probably would include the items that I've brought to the attention of board today, which again, David has mentioned. The January meeting, we had to effectively pause the meeting because of a number of other competing priorities on the day. So we didn't have sufficient people in the room to discuss a number of items which are detailed for the board's attention on the front page of the report on page 178. But I've had an assurance that that will be addressed for the future. So thank you in terms of attendance at future meetings. The specific items to bring to the board's attention are an ongoing concern about the occupational health service and a request to ensure that's reflected in the 25-26 budget and plans, an ongoing concern around organisational development, and particularly what is the right programme for 25-26 and how do we deliver that, and an ongoing concern around firstly ensuring that we have a clear workforce plan to link with the budget and the plans for 25-26, which we're all aware of, and then to build on that with a more medium-term workforce plan in a similar vein to our medium-term financial plan. And I can probably stop there, Chair. Thank you. Those are the critical issues. Other items are detailed in the bulk of the report.
Thank you, Adam. Before turning to Steve, could we just thank you very much and record our thanks to you for all your work as Chair of People and Culture. We're fortunate we've still got you as Chair of Audit and Risk, and also to welcome the incoming Chair, Richard Kramer. I think perhaps the best way to handle this, Steve, would be to turn to you, because we've discussed all these issues, and to give your response to how you would like to take the escalations forward.
Yeah, that's really helpful, David. So our executive leadership team yesterday, which is our most senior executive or operational decision-making forum within the organisation below our committees and our board. So it comprises our executive directors and our clinical directors across the organisation. At their meeting yesterday, considered organisational development and occupational health, the two key areas of escalation, received a report regarding both matters and agreed a number of steps to enable those matters to be progressed. So they're not yet resolved, but an absolute agreement and alignment from all colleagues present on the importance of those matters. With regards to organisational development, one of the actions that was covered there was to ask Alison, Kim and Ella in their respective executive portfolios to rapidly review how the various components that make up our organisational development capability, which includes clearly our organisational development team, but also includes our quality improvement team and other aspects of improvement, can come together in a more effective way to have a fully joined up and aligned organisational development capability, and to use that to resolve whether or not further resource investment is required in the 25-26 planning year. So that's progressing rapidly. We also considered the occupational health position, and certainly concurred with the escalations, Adam, that the committee has raised, and agreed some further steps to consider a broader range of options to rapidly resolve the occupational health capability. Probably not appropriate to go into the details of what those wider options might be at this setting, but we certainly need to be reporting that back to the board at the appropriate point, given the escalations that have covered. So if that brief summary is sufficient, David, I'd certainly want to emphasise the executive leadership team's commitment and determination to resolve both aspects. I'm sure that Kim, Alison or Ella would be happy to comment further, as other executive directors would be able to, if that was helpful. But that's the position as of today.
Thank you, Steve. Alison or anybody else like to comment? Kim?
So Adam, Steve, as I said, tasked initially Alison and I to look at the what does our triangulation of information tell us as regards culture. So we know we already have what I'd call a triangulation meeting with freedom to speak up, complaints, incidents, near misses. We've added to that our staff survey results, some of the pulse surveys that we've done, what's safeguarding telling us, what some of our regulatory meetings as regards our professionals that are in difficulty telling us. So we've drawn that all together the first draft of that paper, and it was meant as a discussion paper, because this absolutely says, do we recognise what the information is, what the picture is painting, recognising we've got some challenging cultures, recognising we've got positive cultures, but then what's the next step? That had some amendments from the executive huddle. As Steve said, it went to in draft form. Draft 2 went to ELT yesterday, our executive leadership group, and we had a really good discussion with our clinical directors and other senior leaders in the room. And there'll be some further amendments that Ella, myself and Alison will work on. One is a cultural barometer tool. What does that look like? Understanding the role of QI, quality improvement, and the ambassadors, what other ambassadors or champions we have, such as, we know we've recently launched the sexual behaviour in the workplace policy. So we're just going to meet on that, and that next reiteration will be going to the Quality and Assurance Committee and our People and Culture Committee the next time round. We're fully recognising and keeping this discursive, because a huge component of this will be how do we role model, lead at care group, specialty, team, and what does that engagement look like? So we're absolutely having that staff voice, recognition of the issues that are currently being raised, and making sure we're tying that together, which should go a long way in being able to help People and Culture Committee and ourselves have a baseline, and then what themes are we absolutely going to concentrate on that make a meaningful impact on our staff.
Thank you very much, Kim, for that very clear and comprehensive brief. What I'd like to suggest is I take any further comments now. I think I should give Alison the opportunity to comment as well if she wants to, as Chief People Officer. But then I think we ought to ask Steve and colleagues to continue the work and come back to us when we've got more time and space to debate the issues, and also when we can see what the 25-26 plan looks like. So first of all, Adrian.
Yeah, it's not really a question for Adam, it's more for Kim and Alison. I noted the planned recruitment of a medical freedom to speak up champion, and I wondered if there was any update on the plans to merge the freedom to speak up guardian roles with Cornwall Foundation Trust to improve resilience and increase capacity.
So on that very, very subject, we had Sarah James in Cornwall Foundation Trust and myself, who hold both portfolios, had a meeting, and that it will be progressing now. We are just discussing with those staff concerned, and we're hoping to have that in place as of the 1st of April for the new financial year. But I will be linking with Mary, because if we are going to have a medical freedom to speak up, there has to be what I would call that integration with the wider group, both for peer support and making sure that we are collating the right trends and not becoming isolated. And they definitely need that integrated support.
Matt Hill.
Just a query about how we integrate and use, I suppose, the learning from national programmes that we've been involved in, such as the Perinatal Culture and Leadership Programme, to shape some of the thinking strategy as well. Just hopefully that can feed into this as well.
Yeah, that will be part of why Ella's also joined us, because there's quite a lot in neonates, maternity and other services that we can learn from.
I'm going to take one last comment if she wants to comment. Sorry, Ian's come in. And then I'd like to ask Alison if she'd like to say anything and then move us on. If that's okay. Ian?
I think it's Isabel.
I think it's Isabel.
Sorry, there's two IDs.
Ian, you can speak to me if you'd like to, because it seems easier when I don't. Just to say that I really welcome this work that's ongoing, and without taking any more time over it at the moment, but I just think it's probably in my head, one of the most pivotal pieces of work that we need to do as an organisation, given the challenges that we know that we're going to be facing over not just the coming year, but certainly the next few years. And I think it's something that we've been wrestling with for an awfully long time. So I'm looking forward to receiving the next iteration of a paper at the Quality Committee, but also welcome any opportunity for us to continue this discussion away from the formal setting, but allowing some time for us as leaders to be able to really come together and think this through. So thank you very much, Kim, Alison, Ella, everybody that's been involved to date, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. I thought I was in the clear. Now we only have one Richard, but we've got two IDs. Alison, I know you haven't got your hand up, but was there anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, no, thank you. I suppose I just want to say thank you to all my executive and non-executive colleagues. Isabel's, I think, probably articulated that this is probably one of the most important things for us to think about in terms of our culture and development. We all know the links between staff engagement and patient safety. There's a lot of work to be done here, but I feel that I've got very much supported by everybody. We do need a fresh approach, and we'll continue to discuss this. We've got the staff survey, the full staff survey results coming out on the 13th of March, I believe is the date. And that again will give us some very useful intelligence around what we need to do differently going forward. So thank you to everybody.
You've got a big agenda ahead of you, so I'm glad to hear you're well supported. So could we then note, please, the report from the January 2025 meeting of the People and Culture Committee? Unless you had anything more to add, Adam, you happy?
That's fine, thank you.
And with renewed thanks to you. I think we should also note the executive response to the challenge and the escalation. And I think it's an example of good corporate governance, because the NEDs did check and challenge and the executive have responded, which is exactly how it should be. Are there any other actions you think we should note, or are those the key ones, Lindsay? Thank you. So if the board is content, we'll note those, and also a comment in the chat that we might need to talk about this some more in a strategy session. Item 12.1 is the biannual equality report, and again, this is you, Alison.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a report on the annual report for equality. I'll keep this as brief as possible. We achieved 2 actions in full during the year. That was in supporting our ethnic minority colleagues to feel safe. We've developed very detailed action plans following the sessions that were led by both Steve and Debbie in their chief executive roles, which have also involved regular conversation with Devon and Cornwall Police. We've made big progress in terms of our data disclosures, although I would always say there's always more to be done. So it's really important that staff do keep their HR ESR system up to date. We paused and delayed one action due to capacity and resource, and we've just been talking about that particular culture piece. We've got 2 actions that are currently in progress and due to complete before the end of March, which is about a refresh of our EDI subcommittee, and also regarding our application for the quality mark. We've got 4 other actions that are in progress, although are unlikely to complete before the end of March, which is our ongoing communication, ensuring that all our staff understand our equality objectives that we agreed as a system. Also about supporting our staff networks, in particular our ethnic minority staff network, trying to boost staff to be released, to be able to go along to those sessions. We're trying a different approach at the moment with ethnic minority ambassadors being put into individual teams. Also that we've got an improvement progress in place, and there is, and as I say, it's a conversation for Kim and myself to pursue around how do we ensure that our gold covenant regarding our armed forces stays up to date, particularly in relation to the patient elements. And I'm just going to pause there for questions. Thank you.
Just remind the board that we're about to recruit for a next director, following the great success in recruiting Uzma, who has now become a fully fledged non-executive director, and that board members who aren't on the selection committee, please do encourage your networks to put forward potential candidates to be our next director. Uzma.
On point. Thank you, Alison, for the report. Really welcome all the actions being taken on equality and diversity. I noted under the risks, and you've mentioned it just now, the comms that is currently in progress, awaiting, but I assume budgetary approval. I wonder if we could have an update at People and Culture once you've updated the executive team on what's happening on that, just to keep up to date.
Awesome. Okay, well, I assume that's fine. Thank you, Uzma. Is that okay, Adam? Or, well, I should say Richard now.
Oh, sorry. Turn to a sketch, continue.
Okay, so if there aren't any other comments, could we?
I think there are a couple of colleagues.
There are colleagues,
yeah. Ian, Ella, I would like to make a comment as well.
Right, okay. So let's go to Ian first, then you, Steve, and then Ella. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, so really welcome the report. Really important topic, and really well summarised. I think I've certainly become, more engaged with the network that I'm executive sponsor for, and particularly in that one around long-term conditions and disabilities. They've got a really clear idea on the things that are priorities for them when I met with them recently, including a disability passport that can be used for colleagues as they move around our system, and what reasonable adjustments they might require when they move from one workplace to another. So I think for me, my ask with this, and it might be through People and Culture Committee, is how do we get a little bit more smart with the outcomes so that we know we're making the progress at the pace that we would all want and need. Because when I read this, I think some of the in progress ones, I was a bit unsure in terms of how exactly we'll be able to measure that we've got to where we want to at the appropriate time, and with that scale of ambition. So I think perhaps there's something for considering in the next report, perhaps back to the board or certainly through People and Culture Committee.
Thank you, Ian. Steve?
Two things. Alison mentioned the ethnic minority staff network. I was really pleased to be asked by the co-chair of that network to come along to the next network meeting. So a quick plug that is, I think on the 27th of March, 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock. And I'll be joining the network chair for a drop-in session. And I'd encourage any colleagues to come along and take part in that discussion. I think it's being hosted here in the Knowledge Spa. Also, it was in my report, I didn't mention it, but just to acknowledge that we were really delighted to receive the Gold Defence Employer Recognition Scheme Award earlier this month. As it's set out in my report, that's a national scheme which encourages employers to support defence and inspire others to do the same. I just want to acknowledge the work of the network in working incredibly hard with leaders across Royal Cornwall hospitals to put us in a position where we achieved that as well. So really significant work, I think, by all of our networks across our trust.
Great, thank you, Steve. Ella? Sorry, Ella?
Hi, yeah, thank you. So I would also support us finding a way to do some outcome measures within this. I think the measurement in here is really important around processes and things we're putting in place, which are a means to us achieving those outcomes. But I think we also need to have an eye on the fundamental outcomes we're trying to achieve. And as the exec sponsor around gender equality, I'd really welcome some specifics on that. And I think Ian's point around through the networks, kind of informing, having the networks help inform the objectives for each of these might be useful.
So I'm going to assume that People and Culture and Alison are happy with those comments from Ian and Ella and Steve, unless anyone tells me to the contrary. So can we move on by receiving for assurance the biannual update on progress with the annual report actions, noting the risks identified which are being considered by People and Culture Committee, and noting, I think, Lindsay, the points made by Ian and Ella in particular. Good. So that takes us on then to item 13. And I'm going to make a plea for acceleration now because we've only got 3/4 of an hour left. We turn ourselves into the corporate trustee, I think, Lindsay, at this point, rather than the board, because we're going to consider the Charitable Funds Committee Assurance Report. So could I invite Richard Kramer, the chair of the Charitable Funds Committee, to highlight the report for us, please?
So we're going to look at, thank you. So we're going to look at item 13 and 13.1. So in terms of the general report, we had a good meeting in January. We're making good progress on developing a lottery product. We also discussed the continued development of business case for robotic equipment. Uzma mentioned the role of the charitable committee in investing in our space. And so I'd like to note that Alison and Karen from the fundraising team had a very productive meeting with the Duchy Health Charity Board regarding the Mermaid Centre. And that's going to look at really improving the physical environment around the existing waiting area, the reception area, accessible toilet and the courtyard garden, as well as providing the best quality care. We need to ensure we provide that in the best quality physical environment, and that gives us pride of place both for staff and patients, and it shows the difference that the Charitable Funds Committee can make, and it's really important. I think we recognise that. 13.1 is around the family appeal and the family accommodation project, and we had an extraordinary meeting of the committee on the 11th of February. And as you know, we've been looking at two options, the refurb of Ben Ruthin House and purchasing a property off-site. The committee concluded that the first option is cost prohibitive and unaffordable. And we've also since had written confirmation from the executors of the 1 million legacy donation with permission to use that donation to purchase a property close to, but not on the hospital grounds. So we're asking the board to improve the recommendation to purchase and refurbish a residential property off-site. And at the committee, we confirmed that this will be up to £1 million. And then the second part is to develop a formal business case to include analysis of the upfront and ongoing costs and delivery model. And at the same time, good governance would require to ensure that we could purchase an off-site property at pace, because if we're into the world of property and working with estate agents, we really need to be able to proceed and make an offer without being caught up in waiting for 2 months for a committee decision.
Thank you very much, Richard. That's all very clear. I know there's been a lot of debate about this for quite a while. I think we're at decision time now. So could I ask if the board is content with these recommendations? Good. So I think we can say that's unanimously approved. And Richard has read out the recommendations, so I won't repeat them. And I think perhaps renewed thanks to the donors for making this possible. Thank you very much, Richard. Item 14 is the Integrated Performance Report. I have had a letter from the public saying that we deal with this too far down the agenda from a member of the public. So could I just reiterate that the reason we do that is because most of the most important performance items we've already dealt with earlier in the agenda, notably under the Chief Executive's report. So I think it's just worth reiterating and recording that, because you could understand that members of the public might not understand why it's item 14 instead of item 1. But that is the reason. Having said that, Robin, could I hand over to you, please?
Thank you, Chair. And on that same note, the urgent care metrics were covered well in depth in Steve's update, so I don't plan to discuss those again here. In the interest of time, I would draw colleagues' attention to our diagnostic performance dropped back ever so slightly, and that was due to an MRI machine breakdown, which is now fixed, and we're already seeing our performance recover. Our elective care continues to improve, and you'll see that in the reports. However, I just want to draw the board's attention to the fact that that is slowing slightly. So still improving, but slowing. And it's just important that colleagues are aware of that. And then to highlight from a performance perspective, our cancer standard, we've been talking for many months around this table about the need to be delivering our ambition of 85% of patients having definitive treatment by day 62. And we achieved 86%, so we've got back over that line that we'd set ourselves. That's way and above of the national standard, but we had our own objective. Our faster diagnostics performance was 79.3%, again above national standard, and at the moment we're just dipped below the national standard for 31-day treatment at 92%, national standard being 96%, but we are already seeing through February a pickup of that position, so I see no reason for us not to be discussing in Quality Assurance Committee and Finance Performance Committee the recovery of that 31-day standard through the next few committee meetings. Also to note, David, on extending on your point, the committees do a lot of the heavy lifting in regards to the integrated performance report and the challenge across it. But if I may, I would check with Kim, Mary and Alison if I've missed anything that we haven't already covered in board before handing back to you, David.
First of all, Mary, and then Kim.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. So it's not that you've missed anything at all, but I thought this would be a good juncture to just mention something that's flagged up around our hospital standardised mortality ratio. So this isn't a board where I'm presenting a learning from deaths paper, but I think there's something important that we probably need to air. So you'll be aware that activity within the hospital is all coded, and we have a lot of highly specialised coders doing this work, and the information that they code is submitted to the secondary users service, and it produces the metrics that we use for a whole raft of different reasons. Importantly, that information is used for financial calculations around the elective recovery fund, but it's also used to generate our mortality statistics. So particularly the hospital standardised mortality ratio, which is one of the many markers used to ensure that we are happy that we have a mortality rate within the expected range, and that we are flagging any early changes to make sure that we are on top of any issues we see. And one of those examples would be the fractured neck of femur data that we've already touched on today. There is a national issue around recruitment and retention into coding roles. And RCHT is as affected as everywhere else, and potentially disadvantaged by reasons including geography in terms of attracting people into posts. There are other reasons as well. We're not actually able to be fully remote in terms of our work offer because of where we are with our digital position, which will change ultimately, but is that at the moment. And as a result, we do have gaps within our coding team. What this has led to is the requirement to focus on specific areas of the coding rather than to be able to manage the entirety of the coding in a timely fashion, and we do have a backlog. And the areas that have been focused upon in the last couple of months have been the elective activity, specifically to make sure that we are getting the correct financial package around the ERF, elective recovery fund, and also because we realise that coding of deaths is really important. We have somebody very specifically focusing just on the coding of deaths. So our coding of deaths and our coding of elective activity is pretty much up to date, but that has left a disproportionate backlog within the emergency or unplanned area of activity. This has had a significant impact on the HMSR, the hospital standardised mortality ratio calculation, because what it has done is given us a very accurate number for our deaths, but has falsely skewed the denominator for that. So in the last month, our HMSR calculation has jumped from 98, which is below the 100 and very much in the acceptable and expected range, to 171, which is alarming when you first see the figure. There are mitigations in place to give us assurance that we are not looking at an alarming picture in terms of our mortality rate. We have 96% plus of our deaths reviewed by the medical examiner, and any that are flagging as a concern are then looked at in more detail. We have the mortality review oversight group that looks at a broad range of metrics, not limited to HMSR, to give us additional assurance. We can look at our actual numbers of deaths, and they mirror the seasonal pattern that we have seen over the last 18 months, so they are not out of keeping with what we would have expected. And we can also look at other measures of mortality, so the summary hospital mortality index, so the SHIMI indicator, and because that is calculated in a subtly different way, including a greater lag period before the calculation is made available, allowing the coding to catch up, we can watch this and we hope not to see the same difference because of the coding disparity between elective and non-elective activity. So there are, and our SHIMI is broadly stable at the moment. So there are those, and we will continue to watch those, and there are those assurances in place, but I recognise that when the HMSR hospital standardised mortality ratio figure is more broadly circulated within committees, it is likely to raise an eyebrow, and so I wanted to let everybody know that we are aware of this. We're seeking to mitigate. There is going to have to be greater scrutiny on what we do to actually support the coding team to fill that gap, so that we're not recurrently having to worry about this, but we are getting assurance from other places around our mortality figures.
Thank you, Mary. I think the board appreciates you giving such a full and open account of what could otherwise be a worrying position, and you're assuring us it's a data issue and not an actual issue, if you know what I mean. Steve.
Well, just to add to that, I think it's really helpful summary. So we're briefing board at the earliest opportunity of this matter. Mary's done that verbally. I think what we'd be suggesting as the next step is we provide a report providing further detail on that to the QAC committee. And just given the nature of this, I think that would probably be appropriate to come back to board at the next public meeting. So in addition to the verbal report, we have the more detailed kind of reporting through our Quality Assurance Committee and then back to board, so that we can have further assurance and further opportunities to test and challenge this.
Well, I think that's important, but just to check with you, Mary, you're assuring the board that we don't have a spike in mortality or excess deaths. You have triangulated data on mortality.
Yeah, so we don't have a...
There's a nominator and
yes,
a numerator and denominator issue.
Yeah, we don't have a spike. We know that there are a couple of areas that require ongoing scrutiny, particularly around fractured neck of femur. That hasn't changed and our focus remains, but there isn't a substantial difference between the previous month and now, other than the statistical error, if you like.
Board content to take that assurance from the Chief Medical Officer. Clearly a very important issue, but given that it's triangulated in the way that you've expressed, and we're very clear about how many people do sadly die in our hospitals, I think the board would be happy to accept that assurance and the further work. Kim.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Mary, it might be important to point out, because this is a rolling, this statistical change, we'll have to keep noting, won't we? Because this will have it's not going to go away. How do we, I suppose, square off that rolling?
So our in-month position obviously can't be changed, although, and I won't go into it, and I'm only just beginning to understand the flex and fixed position of the SAS data. It will automatically improve beyond the freeze date because you get two goes at submission, basically, and a lot more of the coding will have done before the HMSR SAS freeze date. So we will normalise, we're estimating we're normalised to around 116 with the in-month data once we've got that. But it is a 12-month rolling picture, and therefore it will wash out in time rather than immediately.
That's important to note. I think it's a statistical change, otherwise it will make us a continued outlier, wouldn't it? Thank you.
I would add we're one of a number of trusts in an identical position. Not
I
all.
noticed in the paperwork we're not alone in
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
What issue, Steve? Final word from you?
Well, I do note that I think Adam has got a comment as well, or a question.
Adam, you come in first, and then Steve.
It's on a different matter on the IPR, if we finished on that particular point.
Not anything from you on the...
Thank you. No.
So Steve, to finish on HSMR, and then to Adam.
We'll also be considering this through our executive risk group oversight mechanisms as well, but I think Mary's provided a kind of comprehensive verbal summary, and as we confirmed, we'll formally report that through our QAC committee, and we can ensure that board members have sight of that formal reporting through board as well.
Oh, it was just on my section, so it's not on HSMR.
So it's a complex issue to record, Lindsay, and you may want to cross-check with the CMO, but we're taking assurance on the key point about the facts about mortality in our hospitals. Thank you very much, and we take that assurance. First of all, then, can we go to Adam on any other issues on the integrated performance report?
Thank you. It was a question on stroke pathway performance, and specifically the significant drop in performance on stroke dysphagia assessment within 72 hours. I was hoping to just get a little bit more information on what's caused that and what we're doing about that from whoever the right person to ask is, please. Or people can come back to me if that's helpful.
Take that, Robin, or come back offline?
I'm not an expert on the stroke dysplasia, but happy to come back. And Kim, have you got anything?
No, I think we'd have to come back on that.
Chair, I raised this question at QAC, and it was to do with the trauma beds, the critical incident, the trauma beds for the stroke pathway and fractured neck of femur were being used, so there was a delay in getting people through.
I think, is it okay if I come in? I think the stroke pathway more generally, you're absolutely right, Adrian. I think and impacting on the SNAP score, it's about getting the stroke patients to the right place. In terms of the specific dysphagia metric, I think we'd need to go and look a little bit more into the speech and language therapies input and what is happening to flag that, because I don't know the specific answer to that, and it might all be part and parcel of the same flow issue, but I can't say that with any degree of confidence, so the three of us can go away and look at that.
Could Adam receive a response offline?
That'd be great, thank you.
And then, if necessary, report back to QAC.
Yeah, it will definitely come to QAC. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Kim, you want to come back in?
It was just on the integrated performance report. I'm sure the public would have noted that during this January, we had a short period of 2 weeks where facial masks were introduced to our receiving areas in our hospital. And that was because we'd had several flu outbreaks. And that was a precaution that we took to make sure, especially under pressure, that we were absolutely protecting staff and other patients. And we soon normalised, and thank you to all of our staff, members of the public who really helped us be able to enforce that during this period. And then I have raised several times that our C. difficile tolerance is going to exceed. I have also pointed out that this is a national issue, and the UK HSA, which stands for the United Kingdom Health Security Agency, are now going to start a C. difficile technical group to have a look at this issue nationally. And of course, we'll take our part and guidance in that, but important to point that we're not being complacent and we continue to work hard in this area. Thank you.
It's fair to say, isn't it, when high levels of infection, visitors to the hospital and family members help us a lot. Anything else on the integrated performance report? Can't see. I've got 2 pages on my screen, so I don't always pick up the hands, but I can't see any more. Isabel, can you see it?
I'm not seeing anything, no.
Okay. So we've discussed the report for assurance. We've recorded the important points about HSMR. Any other actions arising you want us to record, Lindsay?
No, Chair, that we just will have an update at Quality Assurance Committee regarding our stroke performance.
That'll come through QAC, Quality Assurance Committee. Thank you very much. We move on then to item 15, the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee. Adam.
Thank you, David. This is the assurance report for the January Audit and Risk Assurance Committee. One item brought to the board, I guess, for information, for reminding colleagues. Each meeting of the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee, we receive a report on losses and special payments that the Trust have incurred. And obviously, the best way of addressing losses and special payments is to stop them happening in the first place. So this is just a reminder for everybody that if people take ownership of following the correct procedures and policies and working that through, it shouldn't always fall on the finance team or the payroll team to recover things after they've happened. If we can stop them happening in the first place, that's far more effective. I know we all know that, but it's just a reminder. It's something that we look at each meeting, and we've spent a bit of time reviewing all the policies and procedures to make sure they're fit for purpose, and we're looking at how they get communicated across the organisation as well. Other than that, fairly standard meeting looking at standard items. I guess to highlight to the board, we've got ongoing work around making sure we're adequately addressing concerns flagged by either internal audit or external audit. And coming to the next audit committee is an update paper from Ian's team and Ella's team around what work have we done as a trust since the external auditors gave their view of 23-24 and highlighted some concerns around value for money for the organisation as a whole. So having a report back on what have we done since then to look to address some of those concerns. That's coming to the March meeting next week. And similarly, we're doing a lot of work around addressing concerns expressed by internal audit about previous pieces of audit work. But the detail of that is outlined in the paper, and I'll stop there.
Thank you, Adam. Any comments or questions or discussion for Adam? We need to ensure that all parts of our organisation take ownership of minimising losses and special payments. So we need to record that. And I think Alison wants to come in. Alison.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to the electronic HR system transformation programme in relation to manager self-service, because this has made a big difference to the reduction of overpayments. However, if any manager out there is listening, as soon as you do receive a leaver, because that is the biggest driver of overpayments. Making sure that is processed through manager self-service makes all the difference in the world. So we've kind of eradicated the losses of pieces of paper now through having an electronic system, but to say it is acting on, ideally I'd like people to stay, and we have those stay conversations from a HR perspective. But if somebody is leaving, acting on that piece of paper is really important. Thank you.
Alison. Any other points? So noting that escalation and recording that, Lindsay, I think we just note the report. Thank you. Thank you very much, Adam. That brings us on to the board assurance framework, which I think is pretty technical this time, isn't it, Lindsay?
Yes, so thank you, Chair. So the BAF is updated after each committee meeting and with the relevant execs, and the changes are made in track changes for ease. The last time the board assurance framework was approved by the board was in January. So we've had quite a comprehensive discussions over the last couple of months, and also Audit and Risk Assurance Committee asked us in January to look at and consider our tolerable risk scores and our target dates for each of the BAF elements. So this was undertaken with our execs and reported back through to our committee meetings. Colleagues will see that the report actually acknowledges that the target dates were not achieved and had been extended, and also when considering the tolerable risk range, they had not actually been achieved across all BAF elements in the year. So the committees noted this and considered this, and we agreed that we would look to the board during a risk appetite discussion, which we've got scheduled for later early this year, to review those risk ranges and tolerable scores. So as the Chair mentioned, it's quite a lengthy update on the BAF, so I won't go through all of the changes, but just to note that we did have discussions with regards to the medical model, which relates to BAF element 1, which is our quality of care, and that in light of the changes that we will be seeing, we will review and do a comprehensive review of BAF element 1 and in its entirety, with the hope to be able to mitigate a number of the gaps that we've got currently on that BAF element. And also to bring attention to two other areas following, it was actually discussion at the last board around workforce, people, culture. We did update BAF element 2 and added a new risk, a new gap around organisation inclusive culture. And we also included a new BAF gap in assurance on BAF 3, which is our digital around our e-care transformation programme. Kelvin and I had quite a detailed conversation where we've included a number of new actions to address the gaps there. So, Chair, I don't propose that we go through all of the proposed changes, approval for closures, etc., and ask board members to approve. Thank you.
So there are too many to read out. There's over a page of them, but as Lindsay's explained, they're all the technical and proper process of opening and closing and approving actions. Is the board content to approve them as set out on the agenda paper? Thank you very much. And in the chat as well, if people are content. So that takes us on to item 17, summary consideration of risk. Plus any things that we need to escalate to the Corporate Risk Register from today's meeting.
Thank you.
Lindsay, could you introduce this, please?
Thank you, Chair. So I'll try to summarise from our discussion today, but I do welcome colleagues, particularly executive colleagues, to comment as well. So we've talked, and I just did then as well, about our medical model, the changes around our clinical vision of flow and the introduction of the THP, which are all really important and will be reflected in the BAF. So just to bring that to your attention under this item, that we will be picking that up through our discussions. And again, we have talked extensively around people and culture, areas of focus, the culture review that's been undertaken and how that's reporting through our governance mechanisms. But we will need to consider how we reflect that on our board assurance framework and how it links again with our strategy. And I think we've talked about having a strategy session in particular. The other matter I wanted to draw attention was to HSMR. Obviously, the coding issue that we've got. We are considering this at our next executive risk group. So this will be added onto the corporate risk register. And also for consideration on the corporate risk register, I'd be suggesting that we look at our data breaches around inappropriate access to records, etc. We've talked through that for Quality Assurance Committee, but I suggest that we have a conversation with Alison and colleagues around adding something onto the corporate risk register. Again, I've talked about it at eCare. Obviously, we've got the inclusion with the new actions, which are responding to gaps around the eCare programme. But we talked again today, particularly around the financial impacts in 25-26. So I think we should cover that in our considerations, Kelvin. And I think that was about all of the matters that I wanted to escalate through this discussion. Thank you, Chair.
Just to check with you or Orion, the risks around cash flow, do you think they're already well reflected in our corporate risk register?
We did talk about cash. Ian probably may wish to comment as well. We did have a conversation around whether or not we should include something in the BAP. We felt at the time, which was last month, that we didn't wish to add anything in, but we said that we would keep that under review as we progress through the rest of the year. So I can see Ian's put his hand up. He may wish to comment further.
Ian, would you like to come in, please?
Yeah, so under BAF 4, Chair, that is one of our risks that we acknowledge, and we've got the various lines of defence that are in place for that, including the quarterly deep dive that goes to Finance and Performance Committee around cash. So just to be clear, it is in the BAF as a risk. What we're not identifying is any gaps in assurance at this point that need further action, but in line with normal process, Lindsay and I will happily keep that under regular review.
Thank you very much. Is the board content with the items that Lindsay has identified for escalation in terms of the board assurance framework and corporate risk? If so, thank you very much for that, and we'll record those. The next item 18 is a change. Rather than scattering starred items through the agenda, we've brought them together in one item called Matters of Report. Nobody has asked to unstar any of these items, Lindsay, so they therefore lay on the table with the appropriate actions to note arising from them. So we come to item 19, which is questions from the public. Lindsay.
Thank you, Chair. We've had 3 questions from members of the public today, so I'll work through them and I'll then invite colleagues to comment on them. So question 1 is from Jane Burnell. She's asked around patient engagement. Can you give more details about how the Trust engages with patients of different ages with different conditions and includes hard to reach groups? I was going to ask Kim to respond to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane, for your question. So we have quite a few specialist network groups, largely in oncology. But if we're looking for the wider groups, we have our patient experience team that works both at a provider level with our ICB colleagues as a system level. And indeed, we are doing a piece of work with hearing loss at the moment at a regional level with our local authority colleagues to make sure that those that are most vulnerable are able to access our services. We have groups such as visual impairment groups that come and check our signage, our disability groups that come and check our accessibility, for example. We have wayfinders to help at reception to make sure that those who are accessing our services are able to do so as efficiently and effectively as possible. We have many groups around chronic illness with absolute patient engagement and collaboration, but it's such a wide field with so many. Our learning disabilities group, which is known as CHAMPS, come in and they check our culture. Are we giving the right information? Are they able to access? We've got easy read. So there's quite a plethora and an index. And we're trying, as you know from our board stories, to draw that all together into a single place and how do we advertise that, but we'll work with our system colleagues on that as well. We also have work that's done with our traveller community, not just in maternity now, but other groups, as well as some of our isolated fishing communities as well, and some of the chronic illnesses that they have. So there is a wide plethora of groups. We're trying to bring it all together and to make sure that everyone has equal access. And I've probably missed some out. The list is so great.
Thank you, Kim. Any more questions?
Thank you. Yes, a question too from Jane Burnell. She says, how many patients now have to be placed in beds in temporary escalation spaces? What are the long-term plans to reduce this? So I'm going to come to Kim and to Robin as well.
So Jane, I can say it's a dual role because we do, so being the dual Chief Nursing Officer across RCHT and CFT, when we introduced escalation or boarding spaces, we call ours temporary escalation spaces. We made sure that we did it equitably and tried to follow a patient pathway. So we have plus minus 33 escalation spaces in RCHT, and in CFT we have 11 temporary escalation spaces, but we also in addition have 12 escalation beds open, which gives a total of 23. We have a standard operation practice or a clinical guideline. We are very, very clear who can go into what space. We absolutely need the right equipment, the right staff, the right place to try and make sure that all of our patients get out of an escalation space as soon as possible. And that might mean that the escalation space can turn over more than once a day. Not all spaces are beds, some are chairs, and that's why I spoke collectively about that continued work with infection prevention, control, estates, and fire. We do have a paper that goes quarterly to our joint Quality Assurance Committee that outlines, this is a national, often known as corridor care, is a national issue, and there is some guidance from that, and we had a letter back a few years ago in July. So there are points that we answer. We absolutely keep it under review, and at the moment, with all of the flow work that we've been speaking about today, we're working across both organisations to make sure that we've now got what is our plan to de-escalate, and in what sequence against risk we will be able to do that or step back up again. But it's something that we discuss at our part 2, which is our dual provider Quality Assurance Committee, to make sure we're getting that risk management or any complaints, themes or trends around this rectified, and we can move forward. It's very much owned by Robin and Tamsin as our respective Chief Operating Officers, Adrian and Mary as our Chief Medical Officers, and myself.
Thank you very much, Kim. Robin?
Just to add to the second part of the question, what's the long-term plans to reduce this, is that we spoke earlier in the board around our clinical vision for flow, the timely handover protocols, the work that we're doing across the whole system with regards to the reform programme, all tied together, Jane, to form a plan that we do not want to see patients in these escalation spaces as a whole system and as a trust.
Thank you, Robin. Any more questions, Lucy?
Just one more question, Chair. So the last question is from Richard Raymond. He says, in terms of flow, where patients are being managed at other locations such as Campbell Redruth Community Hospital and West Cornwall Hospital, how are the board ensuring that usage of equipment to facilitate patient management on the sites, e.g. blood testing, is being done safely? What support are they offering to teams that manage such equipment as part of the drive for flow to be managed on such sites, as the teams that facilitate such equipment are small? And the ask seems to be increasing. I'm going to come to Robin.
I could talk for West Cornwall because that's part of our trust. The escalation spaces in West Cornwall are within the ward, so the patients will have access to exactly the same standards of care, equipment, staff in those escalation spaces as any other patient on the ward.
You and I saw those recently, didn't we?
Absolutely. Yeah, we did, David.
And And just we had one other question from a member of staff who's actually asking regarding trust HR policies and procedures around working from home arrangements. As per the protocol for questions for members of the public, questions at the meeting must relate to papers being presented on the day, and we're not discussing anything around working from home arrangements today. However, we felt it was important to note that a question was raised by a member of staff and to confirm that we will be engaging with that individual and the Chief People Officer, who's brief, will be in touch through myself to give information to that colleague.
Okay. So that was my ruling on that, because it's important we maintain the principle without setting precedents. But equally, if people do ask questions off topic, we can arrange for them to be responded to offline. So I hope that's a reasonable compromise. I think that completes the questions, Lindsay, and thank you very much for those people who've asked them, and thank you, Lindsay, for gathering them together. Item 20 is our meeting effectiveness evaluation. Has anyone got any reflections on the meeting in terms of the various questions that are set out on the agenda?
It was good to see an effort to reduce the pack size. It enables you to flex the agenda and focus on those areas that higher priority, higher importance.
Thanks. Alison?
I just wanted to reflect on that very last session and thank everybody who put a question forward today.
Okay. Any other reflections, bearing in mind it's 12:59? So my reflection would be we've ended on time if no more hands go up. So the date of our next, am I out of luck? The date of our next meeting is the, just remind me, the 1st of May, is it? Public meeting?
1st of May.
The next public meeting is on the 1st of May. We are going to go into our private board meeting. So I will declare the public board meeting closed, with thanks to everyone who's been involved. And could I ask board members to reconvene at 1:30, please, for the private board? Thank you all very much.